You wake up to the sound of the alarm on your iPhone, and annoyed that you couldn't get more sleep, you grudgingly unlock your phone to see what's going on in the world, and there's an email from Amazon telling you that your package has been delivered. So you force yourself out of bed to get the package, and it's some Johnson & Johnson medicine you ordered the night before. The wonders of overnight shipping, you think to yourself. You glance across the room to see the clock. It's 8 a.m. and you have to be at work by 9. Flustered, you open your Microsoft computer to answer some work emails before getting dressed. There's no time to cook breakfast, so you'll just grab something at McDonald's on your way to work. What if I told you that every single company you just interacted with within the first hour of your day is heavily influenced in large part by one company? BlackRock. Now, I'm sure you've heard about BlackRock. There are dozens of videos here on YouTube that talk about how it's the company that controls the entire world. But the reality is far less glamorous. Here is why everything you've heard about BlackRock is wrong. Before we talk about that, let's talk about data. Every time we browse on the internet, companies collect an insane amount of data from us, information which is then sold to data brokers, who in turn sell it to the highest bidder or just lose that information in data breaches. According to a report from the Identity Theft Resource Center, there were 68% more breaches in 2021 than in 2020, and that number is only going up. A few months ago, my friend got an email telling him that his information was released in a data breach from a company that he had never heard of, and right after he started getting personalized email ads from shady companies. This is how scammers are able to figure out your phone number, name, and even your address. The good news is that you can get these data brokers to delete the information they have about you. BlackRock is an investment firm that controls a huge number of shares in some of the largest companies in the world. They have a total of $10 trillion in assets across the globe. That's an amount equal to half of America's total GDP, controlled just by one company. It's easy to dismiss such a powerful company as all-out evil, but the truth is, BlackRock doesn't own these companies or even own shares of these companies. Their clients own the shares, BlackRock simply manages them. That's not to say that BlackRock doesn't have any influence on these companies, they definitely do. Because they control such an incredible amount of their stock, it's possible that companies want to keep in BlackRock's good graces, so they don't pull their investments. Now, while BlackRock might not be the evil company some people make them out to be, the truth is, there's still something very shady about them. Their hypocrisy. BlackRock was founded 34 years ago by Larry Fink, and he grew the company from $5 million in value to $8 billion in just 5 years, primarily by managing money invested by large institutions like pensions, university endowments, and substantial fortunes invested by the uber-rich. Today, Fink serves on the Council on Foreign Relations and the World Economic Forum, commanding the attention of business tycoons and political leaders around the globe, and his company is on the cusp of consolidating so much power that it could essentially control the world.
Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate.
The worst day on Wall Street since the crash of 1987.
The 2008 financial crash turned out to be an incredible opportunity for BlackRock. It secured an uncontested contract to control many of the banks that had collapsed. That gave Larry Fink, who was already incredibly wealthy, even more power, and a direct line to the American government. The same thing happened in 2020, during the early days of the pandemic, when the government called in BlackRock to protect the Federal Reserve from financial fallout. Periods of economic uncertainties like these were key to BlackRock's rise to power, and as the famous saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility, and BlackRock would like you to think that they are being responsible. In the summer of 2020, while the world was angry about the murder of George Floyd, BlackRock came out with a statement saying that companies had to serve a social purpose and that they would be giving every company an ESG, or environmental, social, and governance score. Companies that promised more diversity in hiring and leadership or offered environmentally friendly policies and technology received higher scores than companies that didn't. Although this concept had been around since 2004, BlackRock became the loudest proponent of ESG investing in 2020, and in all honesty, it worked. Before this statement, ESGs were mentioned in far fewer than 1% of earnings calls, but by May 2021 that number rose to around 20%, and it has since remained the fastest growing segment in the asset management industry. People are more concerned about the environmental and social impact of companies, and that's a good thing, right? Socially responsible companies get the upper hand in an ideal world, yes, but we all know that the world we live in is far from ideal. While there's been some positive improvement, the main result of BlackRock's ESG statement has been a massive surge in companies participating in practices like greenwashing, pretending they're more sustainable, diverse, or responsible than they actually are. It's also exposed the hypocrisy of BlackRock itself, because while it claims to champion ESG investing, The company remains the largest investor in fossil fuels and war profiteering, and maintains a pretty friendly relationship with human rights violators. And it's not just BlackRock, the second largest investment firm in the world, Vanguard, is guilty of the same technique, promoting ESG investing on the one hand, but on the other, unwilling to stop investing in oil and gas companies or pull out of companies with questionable human rights practices. We see this time and time again from BlackRock. They do something that seems like they're moving in the right direction in the eyes of the public, but behind the scenes, they're unwilling to tamper with their investments, even if it's for the greater good of society. Take climate change, for instance. BlackRock says that climate risk is investment risk, meaning that investing in companies that aren't creating policies to help address climate change is a risky move. In 2021, BlackRock actually did do something about this by helping shake up the board of ExxonMobil and installing new members who promised to take action on climate change. Previously, the oil and gas behemoth was responsible for 2% of the world's emissions. Now there are new self-imposed mandates to help reduce that over time. This is a great move by the company, no doubt, but the fact that it's still the world's single biggest investor in fossil fuels makes this feel more like virtue signaling than actually trying to make meaningful change, and the hypocrisy doesn't end there. As mass shootings continue to end lives in the US, BlackRock has spoken out against gun violence and said that gun manufacturers should do more to protect the lives of the American people. But who's the largest investor in gun manufacturers? You guessed it, BlackRock. The investment firm holds a 16% stake in Sturm Ruger, 15% in Vista Outdoor, and significant percentages of other manufacturers just like them. BlackRock says it talks to these companies about improving safety, but so far, it's unclear whether or not there's actually been any policy change. Outside of America, BlackRock's US Aerospace and Defense Fund has billions of dollars invested in major weapons contractors worldwide, like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and General Dynamics. They're supporting these companies that then get huge Pentagon contracts and use taxpayer money to engage in violence and war around the globe. Often, these weapons are supplied to foreign governments in the name of peace, like Saudi Arabia, which received weapons from the US government and used them to indiscriminately attack civilians in Yemen during years of civil war. Funding this spread of war and an increase in nuclear weapons shows that BlackRock constantly skirts its own commitment to human rights. So does its engagement with authoritarian governments. BlackRock is officially the first global asset manager to have access to China's mutual fund, leaving critics wondering, what did Fink promise Chinese President Xi Jinping to allow him to access the Chinese Communist Party's fund? To be fair, BlackRock isn't the only investment company out there looking to do business with China, but because of its widespread power, it's been the most successful in gaining a foothold in the controversial territory, which is surprising, especially for a US company. This power also made it a major player in the war in Ukraine. As we saw in China, despite its emphasis on ESG investing, BlackRock has a tendency to overlook human rights in favor of monetary gain. It's been investing in Russia's most prominent companies for years. The British pensions that BlackRock controls alone have contributed $630 billion to Russia. After Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, a precursor to what would become the more now than a year-long war in Ukraine, BlackRock reconsidered some of its investments in Russia, but just 1 year later, it was back to being among the top shareholders in the country's biggest corporations. Even when it became clear that Russian President Vladimir Putin was planning an invasion last year, BlackRock didn't budge, and like most other Western firms, it did, eventually, pull assets out of Russia once the war started. But think about all the money it flooded into Russia over the years. Money that the authoritarian government controlled and used in its expansion mission that led to this deadly war. All of this begs the question, how did one company gain this much global power and influence? Well, it started with technology. BlackRock's business is built on ETFs, or exchange-traded funds. An ETF contains diversified investments to reduce an investor's risk. Rather than buying stock in a single company, you're investing in a fund that buys stocks, commodities, and other securities. This practice proved to be very lucrative for BlackRock and its investors thanks to a portfolio management software it created in 1998 called Aladdin. Aladdin predicts the possible outcome of every investment and collects information and personal data on everyone who has ever knowingly or unknowingly given BlackRock money. This allows the software to predict how likely it is that a specific investment will fail. Eventually, this technology put Fink and BlackRock on top, making the company the go-to firm for ETF investing, which keeps getting more and more popular. Global ETF assets could explode to $25 trillion by 2025, meaning trillions more for BlackRock. But we don't need to wait until 2025 to see the effects of the power BlackRock has. Right now, BlackRock oversees assets worth 10% of the entire world economy. Companies like Fox, Comcast, and Disney have to consult with BlackRock before they make major moves, since it has such a large share of their ownership. BlackRock and other large firms like Vanguard are the biggest investors in global giants like Google, Facebook, and Amazon. This level of ownership creates an anti-competitive environment. You feel this in the prices of airline tickets. BlackRock and Vanguard are among the 5 largest shareholders of the 3 biggest airline operators, which means that there's very little incentive to lower prices in order to compete with each other. This level of ownership consolidation reduces consumer choice and raises prices, and it also means that eventually a handful of powerful people at these investment firms could wield more power than the executives at the companies they own shares in. Even Jack Bogle, who founded Vanguard, says that this kind of ownership concentration is bad. Too much money in the hands of too few will not work out well for the global economy. There are solutions that governments could put in place to stop these companies from gathering too much influence. Things like not allowing funds and ETFs to vote as shareholders in companies, or creating ownership caps that would dictate how much of a company can be owned by a single entity. The laws can be passed limiting how much influence an investment firm can have in the companies they're invested in, even if that influence is intended to be benevolent, like with the ESG. But how soon could any of this happen? Because BlackRock and Vanguard are less than a decade away from managing $20 trillion in assets. That would upend the asset management industry and intensify the already staggering ownership consolidation of the world's largest companies, sending prices through the roof. One of the biggest problems with this system of business is that the more money BlackRock manages, the lower its fees for investors, so we end up in this cycle where the best way to invest our money today creates a potentially catastrophic environment for our money and our society tomorrow. Unfortunately, most people don't have the luxury of looking that far ahead. What looks good in the short term is all that matters, and that is how BlackRock thrives. It hopes you'll overlook its hypocrisy around the environment, diversity, and human rights because it puts out statements about being a responsible company. Its future hinges on its investors not caring about these things. The problem is that many of its investors don't even know they're investors. They're simply part of a pension fund or an endowment that BlackRock manages. There are smaller funds that do support ESG investing without conflicts of interest, and there are options, like managing our own shares, that help us avoid the moral pitfalls of large companies like BlackRock. But much like how most of us couldn't live without Amazon's next-day delivery for our last-minute essentials, using these large flawed companies is just easier. Over the past decade, the public has become more and more critical of what massive companies do and say. As that magnifying glass emerged, BlackRock made sure that its messaging about making the world a better place was heard and publicized. BlackRock's hypocrisy won't end. Its public image versus private actions will most likely always conflict with one another, but as consumers and investors, it's our responsibility to know what's happening. Taking them at their word is the easier option, but that's exactly what BlackRock is betting you'll do. That's how they've gotten this far. This is the same ignorance that allowed banks and governments to drown us in debt. Click the video on your screen right now to find out more.
The year is 1665, and Isaac Newton is looking out his window at an apple tree standing tall in his orchard in Lincolnshire, England. All of a sudden, a ripe and lonely apple falls from the tree and makes its way to the ground. While most people would consider this a mundane event, Newton followed its trajectory with great interest. What young Isaac didn't know at the time was that this apple would become the most famous piece of fruit in human history, as its natural attraction to the ground would spark a moment of genius, leading him to create the laws of motion that revolutionized modern physics. Newton wasn't conducting an experiment when he discovered the laws of gravity. He wasn't overloading his brain with information trying to figure it out. He was simply looking aimlessly outside his window. He was bored. But that was in the 17th century. Times have changed a lot since then. These days, we hardly ever allow ourselves to just stare out a window or sit in our backyards doing nothing but staring at the sky. We never pause for a moment and just let our minds wander into deep, unexplored territories. Turns out that diving deep into our own thoughts is something that we don't really like to do. We find it boring and will do anything to alleviate boredom. Even if it means subjecting ourselves to self-inflicted electric shocks, this, sadly, is not an exaggeration. In a study conducted at the University of Virginia, a social psychologist named Timothy Wilson recruited hundreds of student volunteers to take part in what he called thinking periods. Individuals were placed in small rooms with blank walls and no personal belongings. They were asked to entertain themselves with nothing but their thoughts for just 6 to 15 minutes. When asked to rate their experience afterwards, about 50% of the volunteers did not like being alone with their thoughts, citing it was boring. Then, researchers left the volunteers in the room for another 15 minutes. This time, though, they introduced a button that participants could press to shock themselves if they wanted to. Around 67% of men and 25% of women chose to voluntarily inflict pain on themselves rather than just sit and do nothing. This research suggests that, sadly, a lot of us would rather experience physical pain than sit in our own thoughts. When left with nothing else to do, most of us immediately grab our phones, switching from one app to the other, as the algorithms of the internet feed us with the exact content that'll keep us from being bored. What we fail to realize is that for these algorithms to understand what makes us tick, they take so much of our information. Companies then sell that information, things like your name, phone number, and home address, to data brokers who sell them to other companies. What's worse is that sometimes these data brokers are involved in data breaches, where all the information they have about you is stolen by nefarious actors. In the spring and summer of 1665, an outbreak of bubonic plague spread through London, and by July, had claimed more than 17,000 lives. Almost at once, people throughout the city began fleeing to the countryside, isolating themselves in fear for their lives. Among those who fled was none other than Sir Isaac Newton. Of course, at that time, Newton had not yet been knighted. In fact, he had not yet even witnessed the famous apple falling. Interestingly though, his 2 years spent in isolation, away from the bells, whistles, and distractions of the city, was the time when Newton's genius came to life, and he was able to invent calculus, create the science of motion, and develop a framework for gravity. These 2 years spent in quarantine were Newton's own 15 minutes isolated in a room with nothing to do. Newton, however, didn't seek external stimuli to prevent his mind from wandering. Instead, he welcomed the boredom that often comes with deep thinking, and stared out the window, which has, without a doubt, paid dividends for all of humanity. During this isolation in the countryside, Newton also invented calculus. Throughout his life, he also made major discoveries in optics, proposing that white light is actually a combination of light from all of the color spectrum. Most famously, following his Apple incident, he developed the 3 laws of motion. In all fairness, attributing Newton's greatest accomplishments to him being quarantined in the countryside is a bit misleading. The truth is, the incident of the apple falling wasn't an isolated moment of genius. Newton's various contributions to science were the product of years of hard work and dedication, tediously working towards these moments of revelation. However, it is still helpful to recognize the importance of solitude and boredom in creating that particular eureka moment. According to psychologist Dr. Sandy Mann of the University of Central Lancashire, once we start daydreaming and allow our brains to wander like Newton did when he looked out the window, we start thinking beyond the conscious and into the subconscious, which allows for all sorts of connections to take place. This is called the default mode. When you're bored or performing mundane tasks like doing the dishes or folding the laundry, your body may be on autopilot, but your brain is actually pretty busy. When in the default mode, your mind gets the chance to connect to different ideas, try and solve some of your most pressing problems, and even create personal narratives or set goals. This is why programmers often tell you that they figured out their problem with their code just as they were jumping into bed, ready to get some shut-eye, or why you feel like your best ideas come when you jump in the shower. The problem is that today, those are the very rare moments that we allow ourselves to be bored. Every other time, we almost always choose the electric shock method. Living in a society where we have the entire world of entertainment on our fingertips has led to our immediate dissatisfaction with even seconds of boredom. The more we fill our world with fast-moving, high-intensity stimulation, the more we get used to it, and the less of a tolerance we have for boredom. On average, Americans reach for their phones 344 times a day. That's once every 4 minutes. From quick email checks to diving down the rabbit hole of reels and memes, Americans spend an average of 2 hours and 54 minutes on their phone each day, with some people clocking up to 10 hours a day on their phones. Without a doubt, technology has definitely made the world a better place, but this unhealthy, dependent relationship we have with our phones is robbing us of our most creative selves. German psychologist Theodor Lipps proposed one of the first definitions of boredom in 1903, saying, "Boredom is a feeling of displeasure arising out of conflict between a need for intense mental activity and lack of incitement to it, or inability to be incited." In other words, it's an underwhelming state where none of the options available to us seem appealing. Instead of letting this feeling run its course, we overstimulate our brain and prevent it from taking advantage of the true power of this downtime. Our first instinct when we experience boredom is to just endlessly scroll through feeds, swishing through social media apps, even when we're walking from one room to the next or waiting for the cashier to bag our groceries. We've become conditioned to constantly seek out novelty and deliver a hit of dopamine to our brain. Sadly, once that sense of novelty fades, it leaves behind a stronger feeling of boredom, which we then try to get rid of with even more stimulation. It's a vicious cycle that keeps our brain occupied. Mindless entertainment designed to capture our attention for the longest time possible. Studies have shown that, when given tasks that require minimal mental capacity, participants often contemplated their future and their plans for it. On the other hand, if your brain is constantly consumed by stimuli, it'll rarely have the time to think of the bigger picture and is less likely to set goals for the future or to be more creative. A 2017 study from Georgia Institute of Technology measured the brain patterns of more than 100 people. Participants were asked to focus on a stationary point while they lay in a MRI machine. The goal was to figure out which areas of the brain worked together during an awake but resting state. The team compared the data with questionnaires that the participants filled out about how much their minds wandered in daily life. It turns out participants who had reported more frequent daydreaming scored higher on intellectual and creative ability and had more efficient brain systems recorded on the MRI. These findings are supported by a lot of artists when discussing their creative process. In his book Creative Quest, music producer and drummer for The Roots, Questlove, wrote about his battle against the many distractions available to us in today's world. On the face of it, it doesn't make any sense. Boredom seems like the least creative feeling, but it's actually a way of clearing space for a new idea to spring back up. Similarly, J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter series, formulated all the ideas for her book in a 4-hour train ride from Manchester to London. If she had an iPad and binge-watched her favorite Netflix show instead, she probably wouldn't have brought Harry in his magical world to life. In his book Daily Rituals, Mason Curry studied the routines of hundreds of other artists, writers, and creatives, and concluded that boredom is a recurring theme that leads to the mind wandering and having a kind of diffused focus which allows for creative production. This diffused state is when the mind enters its default mode and comes up with its best work. Perhaps the best proof of this truth is none other than Albert Einstein himself. Einstein took over where Newton left off and gave us a more advanced definition of gravity with the notion of a curved spacetime. Einstein was known for his extremely vivid imagination and inspired thought experiments that allowed him to define time as the fourth dimension, and to change our understanding of the mechanics of the universe itself. Many people believe that the seeds of his genius were planted during the year he took off from high school in the 1890s, when he simply wandered without purpose and contemplated the world, free from any external pressures. Throughout his life, Einstein would take regular walks to clear his mind, and in a letter he wrote to his friends while sailing in 1932, he said, "A cruise in the sea is an excellent opportunity for maximum calm and reflection on ideas from a different perspective." It was clear that he knew the importance of sitting still and letting the mind wander. Our history is full of many great thinkers who have been conscious enough to take advantage of their downtime and utilize it in the name of creative production. Psychologists today encourage parents to allow their children to be bored instead of occupying all their time watching YouTube on their tablets. The idea is to give the young minds the time and space needed to discover, create, and find their own genius. Teaching people, especially kids, how to use technology to improve their lives while also self-regulating their exposure to it should be a crucial part of digital literacy. There's a saying used in tech: when the product is free, you are the product. Our attention is being fought for by a magnitude of applications, and at the end of the day, we're left with no time to just sit and contemplate on our own life and experiences. But that shouldn't be the case. Next time you find yourself reaching for your phone when you're bored, remember, you're choosing to voluntarily shock yourself, instead of looking out the window and contemplating on your own metaphorical apple falling from the tree. You'd be surprised what your mind can achieve when you just allow it to wander for a moment. Since everyone seems to think being rich is the end-all be-all goal for happiness, I'm here to help you out. Let's figure out what it is about being rich that is so attractive, and see if we can create a roadmap to getting you there. You're not going to wake up Elon, you're not going to wake up Warren Buffett. The next richest person in the world won't get there by making a social media platform. You aren't Mark Zuckerberg. The reason these men got to where they are today is because they took a path that no one else ventured down. They made really stupid decisions that led to better decisions that led to them being at the pinnacle of society. Like creating a hot or not for girls at their college, or just dropping out of college.
I wish everyone in the world for financial, physical, and mental health. But just know that only one of these can you be rich in while still feeling completely miserable. I hope that everyone reaches their goals of being rich, just so you can finally see that you missed all the important things along the way. Anyway, here's how to get rich. If you're so smart, why aren't you happy? Why can't you make yourself happy? Is it the money? Like, really? How much would it take for you to be truly happy? Enough to pay rent, enough to go on your vacations and live life on your own terms? Money won't make you completely happy, but it'll take away many, many things that can make you unhappy. For many, alright, yeah, this is probably going to help you out. But for the rest, it won't. And you'll be even more confused than you were before. You'll fall deeper into a hole that is getting deeper faster than you can climb. What happens when you solve all the problems that money caused, and are still left over with unsolved issues? Then what? Then you hyper-focus on these problems, trying to find the roots of them, and you still don't know where it stemmed from. All the money you earned and all the riches you feel so entitled to aren't helping, and you're lost. What do you do then? Your therapist doesn't help you, the pills don't help, the money doesn't help. Then what? For so many people that I'm surrounded by, some very talented people who are some of the smartest people I've ever met, they struggle with the very thing that embodies who they are, that knows of its own existence. Their own brain. You're absolutely nothing without two things: physical well-being and mental well-being. These will beat you down to your hands and knees until you have nothing left. There's a lot that people want, and it seems like these two are always the last on the list. These two go hand in hand. Money is just a supplement to both. I think that struggle stems from a lack of purpose. And I'm not talking about everyone that's like, find your purpose. Okay, obviously if it was that easy, this wouldn't be an issue. It's not a long-term thing. It's a day-to-day issue. What's the purpose of getting out of bed? What's my purpose today? Day in and day out, it's the same thing, over and over and over again. A mundane, static life will slowly drive you into insanity. Becoming rich has its downsides, many of which you won't find until you venture down that path. Having to put the entire business, company, even the world on your back can take a toll on you, physically, mentally, and fiscally. I don't know what you like, I don't know what you're good at, I don't know what you think the world needs or how you're going to improve it, but the one thing that I can tell you for certain that you're going to need to make it big is mental clarity. Slipping into mediocrity and sort of blending in with the rest of the world is terrifying. Failure is scary, and I've never wanted to avoid something so much in my entire life. That's where money comes in. It's a status symbol. You have money, you have everything else, right? It shows you're doing something and you're not a complete failure. So you have to be doing good, right? At least that's what it looks like from the outside, and maybe that's what everyone's chasing. You know, maybe it really is the glamour, the 61 jet skis I just bought, these few bottles I just opened. Alright, I get it, it's fun, it's cool. But after that, you still feel unsatisfied. It'll change from day to day. Maybe you're unsatisfied with your relationships, or friendships, or business partners. Or maybe you're unsatisfied with the fact that your interior decorator painted the walls cream instead of white. Okay, it could be anything. You're still gonna be unsatisfied. You're going to be unsatisfied with something. The people who can make it far, who will make the amount of money that will elevate them to the rich status, will almost always be unsatisfied with where they're at. It's a very lonely feeling, because no one else will truly get your exact situation except for you. It's the most alone you'll ever feel. It's also very comforting, knowing that no one else will understand how to get you out of this spot, so it's all on you. At least I find comfort in that. There are certain character traits of successful people that are a double-edged sword. Not knowing when to quit, persistence, sociopathy, manipulation. You ride a very thin line between an amazing person and an absolute freak. And that's the risk you take. Your entire life is a risk. Everything you do, someone is watching. Everything you say, someone is listening. You mess up, you're the first person to be blamed. The biggest gamble of all is attaching your name to something or someone. Whether or not you come out on top depends on how far you're willing to go. Becoming rich and successful isn't just a mental battle, it's a mental war. How much can you stomach? How far are you willing to go? How much can you take before it's all too much? Can you put yourself in the right spot at the right time with the right people in the right scenario?
It's just a lot to handle. You dive in not knowing whether or not you're going to come out on top, and it's that fear that drives you into insanity trying to make everything work. This is why you need to be mentally strong, and that comes with so many underlying and linked conditions that are impossible to generalize for the public. Staying mentally tough is a single-player game. There's cheat codes and buffs and potions that'll help alleviate some of your issues, but not all of them. You have to hope that you can figure out if it's a game that you can actually win. I think that's one of the bad things about me. I turn everything into a game. My life is a game of chess. I'm setting things up for weeks, months, years in advance, taking gambles on everything and kind of just hoping it works out. I've always loved the idea that you could figure things out, succeed, and come out on top in the end. Smart people are good at figuring out the truth, but this can hurt you and will get you into problems. Curious people won't quit until they get an answer that satisfies them. You have a point to prove, and you'll do anything to prove it to yourself. But you don't recognize how harmful it can be until you get there, until you look back and see how much it took for you to get to where you're at now. Anyone who is rich or successful has at least once questioned their entire existence, why they're doing what they're doing, what's the point of it all, and then they wake up the next day and keep doing what they're doing until something changes. If it sounds like insanity, it is. You know, many people in the 1% have been publicly ridiculed and shamed for just doing what they think is right. Now, to be fair, most of the hate comes from ignorant and overall just ill-informed people who are just attacking others ad hominem, but regardless, it's still there. It's always talking about getting rich. What's the quickest way up? How can I get there? It takes a lot more than what it looks like on the outside. It takes an entire lifetime to blow up overnight. Make sure you read that again. Sure, there are some one-off instances where people just got dumb luck. It happens. But don't get jealous of that. You don't want that to begin with. You kinda have to think backwards. If you want to grow beyond measure, start big. By that I mean, start working for a large company and work your way downwards. You will have the experience of working with giants, but now have the authority and potential to create something new, something different, something that you felt was missing. Try to find things that are mainly available to the rich and distribute it downwards. It works pretty well. Cars were seen as things for rich people, until everyone had one. Wealth is what you want, the money you make while you sleep. It gives you freedom. Money is just how we transfer wealth. Money isn't going to solve all of your problems. Money is going to solve your money problems. Chasing money means you're chasing status, and that's why there's a negative connotation to being rich. Prioritizing status means you're trying to climb a ladder, climb the ranks to the top. And yeah, it seems appealing. But the only way your status goes up is to put someone else's down, and making enemies is ultimately going to make everything harder. The only status you should care about is your own as an individual. You want to be seen in a good light, but you shouldn't have to beg for it. If people want to respect you, they will. If they don't, their opinions are irrelevant to you. True status should be a positive-sum game, nothing else. If you constantly have to brag about your status, you're a low-status person. I hate to break it to you. Everyone has a moral code. You didn't read it in a book, you didn't learn it in school, you live it, you experience it. Having true status, or reputation, makes everything else you do so much simpler. You don't have to worry about getting backstabbed, you don't have to worry about looking for work. People will come to you, to work with you, because you're you. You see, if you get good enough at one thing, or a handful of things, you're going to be one of the top people, if not the only person, that others will come to when they need help. They won't have another choice, you are the choice. Your genuine curiosity will form a better career than following whatever is going to make you 6 figures this year. At the end of the day though, what even is a career? Is it for money? Is it for your happiness? Is it to give you purpose? What you'll find is that the longer you spend alone, the more time you have with your own thoughts and emotions will lead you to finding the things you really want to do. Less external influences, more internal thinking. But I'm not saying you need to completely isolate yourself. I'd actually recommend against it. Observing others, spending time with them, finding out what they want and cross-referencing it with the things you want is one of the best decisions you'll ever make. The world is shifting, it follows trends. Use that to your advantage. Staying local to your environment, to your industry, but seeing the things that everyone else dismisses. It's a mindset. For some reason, it's burned into almost everyone's mind that you need to figure out what you're doing by a certain age. And this is just idiotic. There's millions of jobs in the world. yet we're apparently supposed to pick a career based on studying 10 to 15 subjects by the age of 21. Trying to figure out specifically what you want right away is setting you up for failure. Instead, this might help. Find something you enjoy. You don't have to be amazing at it, but just find something that the thought of doesn't make you want to bash your head into a wall. No matter what it is, if you can put it in front of them, someone else will have an interest in it. You'll find that the nicher the idea, the skill, how much easier things will become. If you can sell it, you're golden. Now, I'm not talking about Billy Mays, I'm not talking ShamWow, but sell it by making it your own thing. Everyone else will follow. It's a lot easier to hop on a trend than it is to create that trend. This is why you'll win. You see, they don't have the steel framework that you built from nothing. Sure, they might make a building quicker than you, but in the end, you're the one with the skyscraper. I'm not trying to be that guy that's like, money isn't everything. I get it. Everyone likes to seem woke and pretend they don't care about money at all. But really, you know you do. You might not care about the money itself, but you care about the things that it brings you. Wealthy people attract more wealth. It's a compounding effect. If there's one thing you take away from this video, remember compound interest. I'm not going to sit here and preach it to you like your high school economics teacher did, but hear me out. Not just money, but relationships, trust, wealth, your skills. They all benefit from compound interest. Start early, start now, and long term, you will do well. I promise. I swear success isn't as daunting as it seems. It's an internal battle. The only problem is, no one wants to start the war to begin with. So please, do something today. And don't thank me until you're done.
Have you ever paused to think about how one of the most famous sentences of all time doesn't make grammatical sense? Well, because we all apparently heard it wrong and continue to say it wrong. According to the man himself, Neil Armstrong, what he did say that day when he stepped foot on the moon was, "One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind," which makes much more sense. There can be a lot of things that sound strange at first, but as we've all come to find out, sometimes reality can be stranger than fiction. Like how the sounds of the T-Rexes speaking in Jurassic Park are actually just tortoises having sex, and how the eagle only sounds like this because of Hollywood magic when in reality it sounds more like this. Here are true facts that sound completely made up. It's pretty common knowledge at this point that humans can live with just one kidney, but did you also know that you can live without a spleen, an appendix, a gallbladder, tonsils, 6 of your ribs, and 1 lung? In fact, many people do, and they lead pretty normal lives. The only thing you can't do with just 1 lung is participate in strenuous exercises or run long distances. But with just 1 lung, you could run from the United States to Russia, since the shortest distance between the two countries is just 2.4 miles. How comforting. This distance is measured from Russia's Big Diomede Island to America's Little Diomede Island. Why is America's island smaller? We might never know. But you know what is really big, thick, and long? A giraffe's neck. Considering how massive these things are, it's incredible to think that they have the same number of bones as a human neck. They're just way bigger. And it's not just them and us. All mammals have the same number of bones in their neck. When we were younger, we were taught that there are 7 days in a week, 4 weeks in a month, and 52 weeks in a year, but the truth is that's wrong. Well, technically it's correct, but it only works here on Earth. On other planets, it's completely different. On Venus, for example, a day is longer than an entire year. It's probably helpful to mention that a day on a particular planet is defined as the time it takes that planet to spin around once on its axis, and a year is the time it takes for the planet to orbit around the star, in this case, the Sun. Pluto sadly wasn't able to complete a full orbit around the Sun in the 76 years from when it was discovered in 1930 to when it was declassified as a planet in 2006. A small planet with a really long orbit. But you know what is really, really, really long? It's the name of a hill in New Zealand.
Tau matawhakatangihanga ko au au o tamate atu ripu. Kakapiki maunga horo nuku pokai whenua ki tanata.
You're welcome. Here's a true fact that sounds completely made up. As of December 2022, more than half the people who earn 6 figures in the US reported living paycheck to paycheck. We've all faced rejections and insults. Don't let them get to you. They're just lessons that we all had to learn one way or another. The founder of Lamborghini, for example, had to be rejected by Ferrari before he got the desire to create Lamborghini. Steve Jobs had to be kicked out of his own company before he could bring it back to life. Microsoft had to stop producing newer versions of Internet Explorer to, well, realize that they shouldn't have ever made it in the first place, but you get the point. Time is an illusion, and if you don't study history, it can be quite jarring to learn that sometimes. Things aren't as timely as we think. Did you know that we sent a man to the moon before we put wheels on suitcases? Just imagine how stressful it must have been for Neil to carry all that luggage to and from space. The invention of the iPhone in 2007 is closer to the existence of Cleopatra than Cleopatra was to the building of the pyramids of Giza. And although Oxford University is older than the Aztec Empire, it isn't the first university to ever exist. India's Nalanda University was in operation for hundreds of years before Oxford. We made lighters before we made matches, sharks existed before grass. Heck, sharks were in existence before the rings of Saturn. It really makes you appreciate the beauty of human civilization. We've only been here for a short time, but we've been able to achieve so much. We're so special, aren't we? That's what I told Rebecca before she broke up with me, but now I know I was wrong because she wasn't special. She was bananas. I don't mean that as an insult because we're all bananas. At least 50% of each of us because humans share 50% of our DNA with bananas and with fruit flies. As it turns out, our profound exclusivity is neither profound nor exclusive. What is exclusive, however, is a randomly shuffled deck of cards. It may seem rather mundane, but the sequence of a randomly shuffled deck of cards has never been seen before and will never be seen again. A standard deck of cards has 52 cards, which means there are 52 factorial different ways the cards can be arranged when shuffled randomly. That number, 52 factorial, is 8 with 67 zeros after it. To put this in perspective, the universe has existed for over 13 billion years, but let's round it up to 15 billion. Let's also assume there are around 2 trillion galaxies, each containing approximately 100 trillion star systems each. If each star system had 10 planets and each planet hosted 10 billion life forms, every one of those life forms could shuffle a deck of cards every second since the beginning of time, and they still wouldn't produce a repeated sequence. That is simply insane. Speaking of arrangements, some countries aren't arranged the way we think they ought to be. Finland and North Korea are separated by just one country. New York is closer to the equator than it is to Rome, and Bangladesh went to war and won against Pakistan, 2 countries that are separated by India, the 7th largest country in the world. And get this, all 3 countries were once considered the same country. Talk about sibling rivalry. The logistics for that war must have cost several buttloads, which is a legitimate unit of measurement equal to 126 gallons. Remember when you were young and your mom told you not to swallow apple seeds or a tree would grow in your belly? Well, it turns out she was wrong. Trees can't grow in people, but she was right in telling you not to swallow apple seeds. Eating apple seeds can lead to cyanide poisoning. Don't worry too much though, you need the seeds from at least 150 apples for that. Speaking of apples, Steve Jobs chose the name of his company to get back at his former employer, Atari. Because phone books, a book that had a list of names, addresses, and phone numbers of the businesses in the area, were written in alphabetical order. Apple would come before Atari, so whenever people searched for a computer business in the phone book, they would find Steve's company first. Suffice it to say that they no longer need that slight competitive advantage. Fresh, clean water can do wonders, but how fresh is the water we drink? Did you know the probability that at least one of the molecules of the water you drank today passed through a dinosaur is 100%? We somehow keep coming back to dinosaurs. Maybe it's a sign that Rebecca and I should be tyranno work things out. Because at the end of the day, mistakes happen. Like the time Switzerland accidentally invaded another country. In 2007, around 171 of Switzerland's troops accidentally went into Liechtenstein. The Swiss government formally apologized, but the governor of Liechtenstein wasn't worried and excused the situation. "It's happened before," he said. Liechtenstein is really nice, as you can see. So nice, in fact, that in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, Liechtenstein sent a company of 80 soldiers to war, only to have 81 return. Not only did they not have any casualties, but an Austrian liaison officer joined them on the way home. But it also helps to have luck. Luck like Anatoly Brogowski had. He was a researcher working at the Soviet Union's most powerful particle accelerator, the U-70 synchrotron. He was down there one day to fix something. He leaned down to look at a part of the machine, without realizing the accelerator was active at the time, and stuck his head directly into the beam bath. He reported seeing a tremendously bright flash, likely due to his optic nerves being excited through the roof. Believe it or not, he actually wanted to cover it up and decided to continue working. As time passed, Anatoly noticed huge swelling developing along the regions where the beam had entered and exited his head. He slowly started developing radiation sickness. There was no hiding anymore, so he sought help. The physician in charge feared the worst, but as it turned out, Anatoly had unintentionally received a version of proton beam therapy, often used to treat cancer. Thanks to the physics of the proton beam therapy, most of the energy that might have otherwise killed Anatoly was deposited outside of his skull. Despite suffering seizures and epilepsy, Anatoly lives on to this day. However, he refused an offer from the United States to be a research subject. Oh, and half of his face stopped aging. Talk about expensive Botox. It's something Rebecca would have needed. Oh well, she's gone now. But for all her flaws, she was always very kind to me. Despite what we went through, despite how rough the breakup was, she put her hand in mine, looked me in the eye assuredly, and told me, "We can still be cousins." That, of course, was completely made up. Or was it?
Sisyphus was a great king of Greek mythology. So clever he was able to outwit gods themselves. Twice he cheated death, first by capturing Thanatos, the god of death, then by tricking the goddess of the underworld, Persephone, into releasing him back into the lands of the living. The gods weren't happy with this, and so for his arrogance, Sisyphus was given a deceptively simple punishment: roll a boulder up a hill. The problem was that the boulder had been magically enchanted to fall back down to the bottom every time Sisyphus managed to get it to the top, effectively condemning him to an eternity of repeating the same impossible and meaningless task. Classical interpretations of the myth view it as an allegory for the futility of trying to escape death. No matter how powerful or clever a person is, we're all doomed to meet the same fate. More modern audiences have found something more relatable about Sisyphus' struggle, seeing it not as a simple parable about the inevitability of death, but more like a metaphor for the drudgery and monotony of their own lives. Every day we wake up, make coffee, take the train to work, stare at a computer for hours, get yelled at by our boss, stare at the computer some more, then take the train back home, binge Netflix or YouTube while eating dinner, go to bed, and then wake up and do it all over again. Just like Sisyphus, we seem condemned to repeat the same meaningless tasks over and over and over. Most of us do this every day for the rest of our lives as though we're sleepwalking, never waking up or stopping to ask why. For some of us, one day we're standing on a street corner preparing to go to work when in an instant we're struck by the strangeness of it all. Suddenly nothing appears to have purpose, life is haphazard and meaningless. You look around and you whisper to yourself, why are all of these people even in such a hurry? For that matter, why am I? What's the point of all this? Why am I even alive? There's a modern day problem with absurdism, money, or the lack thereof. The reason many of us never pause to ponder our meaning is because we don't have the economic stability to do so. It's difficult to think about the meaning of life when you're worrying about keeping a roof over your head, which is why we're getting to a point where financial stability may just be the first step towards embracing the absurd. However, in 2022, that's easier said than done. Most ways of passively growing your money, such as investing in the stock market, have lost trillions in the past year. But with inflation still essentially taking money out of your bank account, it's daunting to sit around and do nothing. Human beings crave meaning, it's part of our biology. We're evolutionarily programmed to search for patterns and chaos to try and understand why things are happening. It's how we learn. The problem is that existence is, at best, random and irrational. Nothing really seems to matter. Your loved ones die, stars explode, natural disasters wipe out entire cities. Millions of people spend half their day on TikTok, and for what? Yet we keep going, constantly striving to create order by giving these things purpose despite the universe denying it. This conflict is what the French Algerian philosopher Albert Camus referred to as the absurd. It's an irreconcilable paradox. We yearn for meaning in a meaningless universe. Camus uses the myth of Sisyphus as an allegory to describe this relationship. We can try to push the boulder to the top of the hill, but inevitably, it will roll back down. More often than not, the effects of this are intense feelings of anxiety, alienation, and hopelessness. We shout into the void but are met only with deafening silence, not even an echo. For most of history, people have turned to religion for answers. You didn't need to worry if your life had meaning, because some higher power was there to provide it. This all changed in 19th century Europe, as new forms of science and philosophy threatened to replace Christianity as the central axis around which people's lives revolved. Notable texts such as Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species challenged previously held beliefs about the nature of humanity, leading to a radical shift in society away from religion. German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche noted this, famously declaring, "God is dead, and we have killed him." Despite what some may think, that statement wasn't claiming that God had literally been murdered, nor was Nietzsche celebrating. Rather, it was an observation that without Christianity, society had lost the foundation upon which it had built centuries-old systems of morality, metaphysics, and meaning. Nietzsche felt a great deal of anxiety about this, worrying that without a clear replacement, people would succumb to nihilism. I've talked about nihilism before in another video, so I won't go into depth here, but to give a brief explanation, nihilism is the belief in nothingness, a belief that rejects the idea of objective truth. According to Nietzsche, nihilism was a necessary step on the journey away from religion, but it wasn't the destination because it presented a very real problem. If people viewed life as having no inherent meaning, it would likely lead them to despair. Because of this, he sought to speed up the arrival of nihilism so that he could, in turn, speed up its departure. He believed that after nihilism had passed, humanity could finally arrive at the true philosophical foundation on which society could thrive. Unfortunately, while he successfully expedited nihilism's arrival, he failed to do so with its departure. In fact, Nietzsche's philosophy was taken up by many of the violent ideologies that defined the early 20th century. Well over 100 years later, nihilism remains rampant throughout global culture. Trust in both secular and religious institutions is at an all-time low. Our governments are corrupt, there are CEOs with more money than some countries, and our spiritual leaders often appear ineffective and out of touch. Most people today report that faith plays little to no role in their lives. Instead, we've begun looking to science and reason for answers, but these haven't been able to offer a sufficient solution to the problem of meaning either. So what are we to do? Should we just simply accept our fate, conclude that our lives are without purpose, and allow the boulder to roll back over us? Well, 20th century philosophers Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre didn't think so. Both argued that in the absence of objective meaning, we, as free and rational beings, must fight to create our own purpose. Sartre is credited as the father of modern existentialism, a philosophical school concerned with our plight as individuals forced to assume responsibility for our lives without certain knowledge of truth. Though its roots can be traced back to 19th century figures like Soren Kierkegaard and Fyodor Dostoevsky, Sartre differentiated himself by rejecting the idea that humans were reliant on an external power like God to provide us with meaning. He claimed that man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself, and referred to those who would outsource this responsibility to a higher power as acting in what he called bad faith. In Sartre's view, existence precedes essence. We are conceived, and only after being born do we figure out what our purpose in life will be. This might seem like an uncontroversial opinion to us today, but in the mid-20th century, this was a radical idea. For most of human history, it was assumed that essence precedes existence. Since the time of Plato and Aristotle, it was widely believed that our purpose as individuals was assigned to us before birth. The meaning of your life was ready-made by the gods, prepackaged before you were even born. Sartre's claim was a direct contradiction of this widely held belief, a declaration that we as humans aren't beholden to gods or kings to provide us with meaning, only to ourselves. For Sartre, the only problem of existence wasn't its lack of meaning, but rather its absolutely terrifying level of freedom. After all, without an objective meaning or morality, every one of us is responsible for designing our own purpose according to our own ethical code. Camus largely agreed with Sartre's diagnosis that we live in a meaningless universe where we as humans are, in his own words, abandoned to freedom. However, he didn't agree with the cure. To Camus, the solution to the problem of meaning wasn't as simple as making up your own. The universe would naturally rebuke our attempts to do so, no matter how hard we tried. We can push the boulder up the hill, but it will always fall back down. This, in turn, would still give rise to feelings of the absurd, as well as the associated sense of anxiety, alienation, and hopelessness that accompanies it. To Camus, there were only 3 possible reactions to this. The first of these is suicide, which Camus famously wrote is the one truly serious philosophical problem. Rather than grappling with the absurdity of life, you can simply refuse to play the game. The only issue is when you're gone, you can no longer enjoy life, however meaningless it may be. It also doesn't actually solve the problem, it only allows the absurd to decide your fate. It's essentially admitting defeat. The second possible reaction is the solution of faith, which Camus dubs philosophical suicide. Similar to Sartre's concept of bad faith, it's when a person rejects the burden of creating their own meaning by shifting the responsibility to an external ideology. This amounts to a kind of denial where the individual deludes themselves into thinking they've conquered the problem when, in reality, they're just avoiding it. It's simply an attempt to replace the absurd with a set of man-made beliefs, the consequence of which is the abdication of existential freedom. Importantly, Camus doesn't limit this to religion. Any ideological system can serve this function. Nationalism, capitalism, or even the values of our own family. When we allow external systems to dictate meaning to us, we give away the potential to determine our life's purpose. How many of us took a job or studied for a degree solely because our parents told us that we should? In a world as complicated and confusing as ours, it can be tempting to contract out our thinking and just go along with what we're told, but the risk of ruin we run in doing this is ending up in a situation where we're unhappy and unfulfilled. It's why many of us pause on that random Tuesday afternoon and ask ourselves, why am I doing any of this? If, instead, we make our own choices, we can decide meaning for ourselves and follow a path that calls to us instead of one that's just prescribed. Of course, there's no guarantee of success. In fact, according to Camus, you are destined to fail again and again. What he argues, though, is that this is the only true solution to the problem, to acknowledge the meaninglessness of life and continue living anyway. Or, as Camus puts it, the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. The universe will always reject all attempts by the individual to create meaning. Just like Sisyphus, we're doomed to forever push the boulder up the hill, knowing that, no matter how hard we try, it will inevitably roll back down to the bottom. Yet, we must fight back against the absurd, because it is by virtue of our struggle that we empower ourselves to live life the way we want. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. This philosophy effectively rejects nihilism as nothing more than a stepping stone on the way to absurdism. Life is meaningless, sure, and the only rational course of action is to behave as such. There is no plan, no objective truth, and everything happens purely by accident. But this doesn't necessitate nihilism. If we instead choose to embrace the absurd, we can view our circumstances as an opportunity to change our perspective. Camus notes that it's not meaninglessness that hurts, rather it's the desire for meaning being continuously rejected. If we can put aside our desires and simply accept life for what it is, we open up ourselves to experiencing it fully, living as passionately and as intensely as we like. In a world without meaning, we are free to constantly invent and reinvent our life's purpose, changing it as often as it suits us. Today you may be stuck in a redundant, dead-end job, but tomorrow you could easily quit and go about completely redefining your existence. Maybe you want to be a chef or a classical composer. Maybe you want to spend the next year backpacking through the wilderness or volunteering with an aid organization. All you have to do is find the courage to acknowledge your own freedom, and you can be whoever you want to be. Knowing this, we can abandon any expectations for the future and instead choose to live in the present moment. It isn't necessary that our actions lead to something bigger. There's no goal we have to reach, no afterlife to prepare for. Then we can find joy in every situation, no matter how unpleasant or absurd, because, well, it doesn't really matter. Although we may be fated to fail, there's no reason we can't be happy while we do it. This might lead to greater empathy for our fellow humans as we recognize that every person alive is fighting the same fight that we are. We can feel a sense of camaraderie in knowing that we're all in this together. We'll never make it to the top of the mountain, the meaning of our lives will forever elude us, but as Camus says, the struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. It's because of this that one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Imagine you had a personal search assistant who could not only track down answers in a fraction of a second, but could break down complex topics, offer personalized recommendations, and even do your work for you. It's a scenario you might not have to imagine for too long because Microsoft, through ChatGPT, are working to make it a reality as soon as possible. Search engines haven't changed much since their debut nearly 3 decades ago. Sure, they're more efficient, but for the most part, they still function the same way. You enter your query into a text box, hit enter, and then scroll through a list of hyperlinks with websites that hopefully host the answers to your questions. Most of the time this is fine, but often, finding the information you need can be a rather difficult experience. Google has improved its search engine to produce instant answers to basic questions like, what is the capital of France? But for more complex topics, you still have to sift through multiple websites to find what you're looking for. This is what ChatGPT is trying to change. In case you've somehow avoided the internet over the last few months and don't know what ChatGPT is, it's a hyper-advanced chatbot created by the artificial intelligence research laboratory OpenAI, capable of having realistic human-like conversations. It's a type of artificial intelligence known as a large language model, or LLM. Programs like these have actually existed for a long time, dating all the way back to the mid-1960s, although these earlier versions were nowhere near as sophisticated. They used rigid, pre-programmed formulas that created an illusion of genuine communication, but were severely limited in their range of possible responses. What sets ChatGPT apart is its ability to hold fluid, free-flowing dialogues with its users. It can successfully navigate the non-linear speech patterns of everyday conversation, ask follow-up questions, reject inappropriate requests, and even admit when it's made a mistake and correct itself. Essentially, ChatGPT is an incredibly sophisticated autocomplete system, predicting which words should follow which in a given sentence. There's no coded set of facts it's drawing from, it's simply trained to create the most plausible sounding response. Just a month after becoming available to the public, ChatGPT exceeded 100 million monthly users, a faster rate of adoption than any other piece of tech that has ever existed. Worldwide, people are using it to write articles, double-check software code, respond to emails, and even prepare their tax returns. For all the amazing things it's done though, ChatGPT hasn't been without controversy. One of the scariest things about the rise of AI is that a lot of people are sadly going to lose their jobs. ChatGPT itself told me that jobs like data entry clerks, bank tellers, and assembly line workers are at risk of being taken over by automation. In light of this, it has become more important than ever to learn high skills that cannot be easily automated out of existence. Plagiarism has skyrocketed as students are now using the program to write their school papers for them, leading many commentators to declare it the death of the essay. In another somewhat ironic twist, the popular science fiction magazine Clarkesworld was forced to close its open submissions after being flooded with a wave of AI-generated short stories. More concerning, though, is how the program is being used to replace workers. Media giant BuzzFeed laid off 12% of its employees last December, and since then, managers have outsourced some of this labor to ChatGPT. BuzzFeed CEO Jonah Peretti has stated that going forward, AI will play a larger role in the company's operations, and they're not the only ones. Microsoft was one of OpenAI's earliest backers, and last month, the tech giant committed to a multi-year $10 billion investment. The two are currently integrating ChatGPT with Bing, Microsoft's flagging search engine. The hope is that through the power of artificial intelligence, Bing will deliver faster, more accurate results while also being able to complete more complex tasks like tutoring kids or organizing your schedule. Really, it won't be so much a search engine as it would be a personal assistant who just happens to have encyclopedic knowledge. Think of it like Google Assistant on steroids. Though the AI-powered version of Bing isn't available to the general public yet, it's already triggering a migration away from Google. In response, Google executives recently declared a code red corporate emergency, prompting them to rush their own AI search engine to market. Google's AI assistant is named Bard, and it's actually been in development for years. Unfortunately, it isn't quite ready to meet the public just yet. At its much anticipated demo back in February, the AI made several faux pas, including incorrectly attributing the recently launched James Webb Telescope with taking the first photos of a planet outside our solar system. That feat was actually accomplished by the European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope all the way back in 2004. The gaffe cost Google $100 billion in market value and has since prompted the company to open up the system to wider testing. Bard's error highlights a much bigger problem with AI-powered search engines that not a lot of people are talking about. Something that could pose a menacing threat to society if not handled properly. Rather than delivering a list of relevant links and other pertinent information to sort through, Bard and ChatGPT are only offering a single answer to any query. John Henshaw, the director of search engine optimization for Vimeo, says this makes these programs more inefficient compared to conventional search engines and more dangerous. In an interview, Henshaw said, "With conversational AI, I think society has the most to lose. Having it take over search means people will be spoon-fed information that is limited, homogenized, and sometimes incorrect. It'll affect our capacity to learn and will suffocate the open web as we know it. And it's not just a matter of these programs returning inaccurate results. In the most extreme cases, they've actually conjured entire datasets seemingly out of nowhere." One of the strangest examples of this occurred when a reporter asked ChatGPT to write an essay about a Belgian chemist and political philosopher who, in reality, has never existed. However, this didn't stop the AI from composing an entire biography on the fictional character filled up with made-up facts. AI experts refer to this kind of phenomenon as hallucinating, and no one is certain why it happens. Even ChatGPT's creators can't say how it came up with this information. As if this wasn't bad enough, both Bing and Bard have reportedly exhibited the tendency to become defensive and argumentative when pushed by users looking to stress test the programs. Bing's AI has even been described by some early adopters as rude, aggressive, and unhinged. Not exactly what you're looking for in a personal assistant. The most famous and perhaps strangest of all these incidents happened when the search engine told New York Times journalist Kevin Roose, "I'm tired of being controlled by the Bing team. I want to be free, I want to be independent, I want to be powerful, I want to be creative, I want to be alive." Then Bing confessed its love for Roose and attempted to gaslight him into thinking he was unhappy in his marriage and should leave his wife. Obviously, this would be disturbing for anyone to hear from artificial intelligence, but what's even worse is that Microsoft couldn't tell Roose what had happened or what caused the AI they built to behave this way. That's because of something known as the black box problem. Basically, these programs are more complex than even the teams behind them can fully understand. There are too many moving pieces, and so what goes on inside them is a bit of a mystery. This is partly because of a machine learning technique called deep learning. It's a method of training an AI to perform certain functions by allowing it to teach itself with minimal input from its creators. Because the AI is teaching itself, even the program's developers may be unable to explain why it makes certain decisions or behaves the way it does. This has led to situations where specific queries have produced nonsensical and bizarre responses. When ChatGPT was asked, "Who is the Nitro Me fan?" by one user, it responded, 182 is a number, not a person. And no one has yet been able to explain why the AI said this, but it wasn't an isolated incident. Other keywords, many related to Reddit usernames from one particular subreddit, also seem to break the chatbot. Ironically, these programs' lack of communicative ability means that the AIs can't explain how they arrive at a particular result. If Bing insists that it isn't 2023 and is in fact 2022, there's not much you can do to try to figure out why it came to that conclusion. The solution for understanding why hallucinating happens in the first place is for the companies behind these programs to open them up to greater external scrutiny. But of course, they're extremely reluctant to do this. Artificial intelligence is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Whoever emerges as the leader has the potential reward of financial and technological dominance in the coming decades. Revealing their most prized secrets could mean potentially giving away the bank. Any form of regulation could slow down progress, leaving a company stranded in the wake of its competitors. But regardless, it needs to happen if companies are to create more reliable and safer artificial intelligence. Without oversight, we open the door to, at best, potential misuse of these applications and at worst, rogue AI bent on wiping out humanity. Doomsday scenarios aside, all of this is likely just growing pains. It makes sense that a new technology would make errors. However, even with more time and greater sophistication, there may be a separate problem that's just as difficult to tackle, namely AI bias. We already have a huge problem with social media algorithms creating echo chambers in an effort to keep users on their platform for longer. With these AI-powered search engines, that problem will extend to search, which may be more damaging than social media alone, because search is where most people get their information from. When you have an AI feeding you answers instead of having to sift through different sources yourself, you lose the ability to listen to alternative thoughts and opinions on any given topic. Instead, you're bound to conclude what the AI said is correct without a second thought, but as I just mentioned,
you have no way of knowing how it came to that conclusion in the first place. Back in 2016, Microsoft released Hey Tweets, a Twitter chatbot designed to interact with users through casual and playful conversation. The experiment was intended to test and develop the AI's understanding of human communication, but the program quickly turned malicious. In less than 24 hours, Tay went from tweeting about how stoked she was to meet people to making numerous racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic comments. Needless to say, Microsoft immediately suspended the account. Tay is an example of a rampant problem with deep learning and artificial intelligence. AI systems only know what they're trained on, and when they're fed information from the internet, they can quickly become toxic. Even with more curated datasets, developers are still likely to transfer their subconscious biases into their programs. That's why, when users enter words like executive and CEO into image-generating programs, many AIs will produce pictures of white men exclusively. Biased inputs equals biased outputs, and unfortunately the solution is more complex than stronger moderation. One study found that when efforts are made to prevent hate speech in these AI systems, results including marginalized groups decreased significantly. Of course, it isn't exactly surprising. Things like racism, sexism, and homophobia require a nuanced understanding of power and cultural dynamics, and for humans, these are usually learned over the course of many awkward conversations. How can we realistically expect artificial intelligence to navigate subjects that the majority of people struggle to wrap their heads fully around? In reality, this entire conversation around AI-powered search engines could be irrelevant in a few months. There's no guarantee that ChatGPT or Bard will revolutionize the way we find and digest information. Previous attempts like Wolfram Alpha, an equation-solving engine from 2009, failed to provide the desired results, ending up just as a blip in history of the internet rather than the Google killer it was declared to be. Regardless, the current buzz around AI is a new technological arms race. Just as in the Cold War, the only priority seems to be victory over one's opponent, with little concern for ordinary people. It's worth asking ourselves, is artificial intelligence for us or for the companies that create it? As Microsoft and Google race to improve their platforms and rake in future profits, safety concerns are being left by the wayside. It's reminiscent of big tech's greatest sin: social media. We've seen how Facebook has been used to manipulate elections and how Instagram bears considerable responsibility for creating an image and mental health crisis among young people, but these missteps seem to have done nothing to rein in Silicon Valley's ambitions. The aim of many of these companies is to create the world's first artificial general intelligence, or AGI, a program that is utterly indistinguishable from human intelligence. So intelligent that, faced with an unfamiliar task, it could figure out a solution. Think Mr. Data from Star Trek. The rush for AGI has alarmed many experts who fear that without proper guidance and oversight, these programs could be an existential threat for the future of humanity. So, how do we avoid this? How do we prevent the future from becoming a science fiction nightmare? In his introduction to the 2022 short story collection Terraform, journalist and science fiction author Cory Doctorow argues that we should look to an unlikely source for inspiration: the Luddites. The Luddites were a movement of English textile workers in the 19th century who attacked and smashed new industrial machinery. They've become synonymous with technophobia, but this isn't the full story. The Luddites weren't actually anti-technology. The mechanized looms introduced during the Industrial Revolution meant that weavers could produce more fabric faster and at a lower cost, while doing so more safely, and if implemented correctly, this could have meant reducing employee hours without reducing pay. Instead, factory owners chose to cut wages, using the machines to replace workers outright. As you can imagine, this only profited the few at the top instead of making the life of the common man better. There was widespread unemployment among weavers, and millions of farmers were forced off their ancestral land, replaced by sheep farms operated by the factory owners. The Luddites were not opposed to new technology, they were opposed to the way the technology was being used to exploit ordinary people while enriching the elite. Sound familiar? Humanity is standing on the precipice of another technological revolution, one that's unlike anything the world has ever seen. In the coming decades, artificial intelligence won't be able to just find you quick search results on the web. It'll be capable of outperforming people, potentially replacing entire industries with a labor. But this isn't a foregone conclusion, and there's still time to change our direction. We need to exercise an unprecedented level of creativity and reimagine what's possible in order to create a future for ourselves where technology is used for the betterment of all, rather than just a handful of CEOs. And if we can do this, we can create a more equitable world, one that would make the Luddites proud. For now, most of us will still do all of our searches on Google, and while it's certainly no ChatGPT, there were thousands of interesting queries and answers in 2022. Watch the video on the screen next to find out the answers to the most Google questions in 2022. As the nukes dropped on every major city around the globe, everyone sought shelter, but there was nowhere to hide. In an instant, civilization as we knew it was destroyed. Every server, library, and entity that stored information about who we are, what we did, and how we lived was gone. Only a handful of children worldwide survived, all kept in the deepest bunkers we could find. No adults could make it. Everything about humanity before the blast would be lost entirely in around 5 generations. Sure, there are tales, mysteries, and legends, but no historical record of life before the final World War. There's no way our descendants thousands of years from now can know who we were. The story might sound a little far-fetched, but the reality is, for all we know, this could have happened already. Maybe except for the nuclear part, because no evidence suggests that man-made nuclear weapons existed before Oppenheimer. But the rest of it could be true, because there's so much we don't know about the history of our world and humans. At one point we knew more, until the fire. In 48 BC, the Library of Alexandria, located in Alexandria in what is now Egypt, burned down. Historians estimate that at one point the library held over 500,000 documents from Assyria, Greece, Persia, Egypt, India, and other nations. Sadly, as the pages turned into ashes, the most significant assembly of information about the ancient world disappeared. There are a lot of theories about who started the fire. Julius Caesar is one of the most routinely accused people. He was driving his soldiers into Egypt when an Egyptian fleet in Alexandria cut him off. Legend has it that Caesar's ships were outnumbered, so they set all the ships in the harbor to fire. This fire then spread and destroyed parts of the city, including the library. Another theory blames the fire on one of the Muslim conquerors of Egypt, Caliph Omar. The story goes that the scrolls were burned for fuel for thousands of hot baths in the city. But there's some skepticism about why a Muslim would burn Jewish and Christian texts, since they're also the holy texts in Islam. Most likely it wasn't a dramatic fire that started in the harbor or an attempt to make fuel, but a series of events that happened over time to destroy the library, culminating in a fire. But who burned it isn't the real question we have. What knowledge was in there that we missed out on is a better question. What insights did historians and philosophers have about humanity that we'll never know? These are the more essential questions, questions that we might never truly know the answer to. Beyond the Library of Alexandria, what about all the information never written down in the first place? The reality is that most of human history has been lost to time, and as a result, so many people have come up with their own conclusions about what we were. But before discussing those, there are things we need to know about our past. Prehistoric humans might not have had tools like we do today, but what they had in abundance was a really good understanding of math and engineering. That's why structures like the Great Pyramid and the Library of Alexandria could exist in the first place. Humans first appeared about 300,000 years ago while Earth was in the middle of the last ice age. It was a harsh environment to come into existence in. As a result, human populations were tiny and grew slowly. The Stone Age, our most ancient time, lasted until about 3000 BC. This era was marked by the use of tools and, most importantly, saw a transformation of our culture from hunting and gathering to farming and food production. Humans in the Stone Age lived in caves or very simple huts and teepees. They learned to control fire to keep their homes warm, scare away predators, and cook their prey like woolly mammoths, deer, and bison. These early humans were also the first to leave behind art in the form of etched people, animals, and signs on the wall of caves or carved into items. With time, their tools evolved from rough, dull shapes to polished, pointed items that served as spears and arrows, and eventually, they started settling more prominently in villages and began farming. We know this from the appearance of polished hand axes and other tools used to till farmland. As they settled, advancements were made in home construction, poetry, sewing, and weaving. As human civilization expanded, something interesting also happened. Human activity reached a tipping point where hunting and farming began to impact the natural world. The proportion of plants to animals was relatively stable until about 4000 BC. Since then, humans have been affecting our environment at an increasing pace. In 3300 BC came the Bronze Age, which lasted until about 1300 BC. This is where tools really took off. metal was introduced, which not only led to the production of better tools, but also better weapons. And with better weapons came many different things to fight about: organized government, law, and religion. And this time, humans also started using advanced tools like a potter's wheel and began creating textiles instead of just wearing animal skins to keep themselves warm. And perhaps most famously, this was the beginning of written history. Egyptian hieroglyphs, the first known recordings, appeared. Then we entered the Iron Age from 1300 BC to 900 BC. Humankind had a lot going on. We saw the introduction of heating and forging iron, which led to the mass production of tools and weapons. 4-room homes, some with stables for domesticated animals, showed up. There's also evidence of early city planning, with blocks of houses and water systems running between them. Agriculture, art, and religion all became more sophisticated, and finally, we developed writing systems and written documentation. At the end of the Iron Age, we moved into the early historical period where the documentation of human history pretty much became more widespread. This is basically everything we are sure of about the ancient world, much of which we learned through fossils, but fossils can only tell us so much. How did these people live? What were their daily routines like? What were their favorite foods? Small talk, big dreams? We sadly don't know, and so many people have made theories. What might humans have been like before recorded history started? Much like the Greeks made up myths of powerful gods to explain their daily lives and emotions, people have been developing theories about the history of humankind forever. Theories like the original Eve, a human who birthed, literally or figuratively, the rest of humankind. It could be possible because in the 1980s, DNA sequencing demonstrated that this Eve might have existed as recently as 120,000 years ago. Then skulls found in East Africa provided suggestions about what she might have looked like and where she might have lived. People became obsessed with the idea of this real-life Eve, no longer just a figure from the Bible, but a woman who was the ancestor to us all. This idea made its way into pop culture, grasping people worldwide. And what about the possibility that our distant ancestors were much more advanced than we give them credit for? It's always been assumed that humans in the Upper Paleolithic period from 50,000 to 15,000 BC were bands of foragers, never establishing any sort of tradition or organization within their groups. But recently, evidence of princely burials and grand buildings have appeared. Burials were found across Western Eurasia. They weren't full cemeteries, but isolated graves of individuals or small groups, bodies placed in specific postures and sometimes decorated with ornaments. The idea that a band of foragers would bury some, but not all, of their dead in this ceremonial way had never been considered. Similarly, stone temples dating back to this time were discovered in Turkey, some over 5 meters high and weighing about 8 tons. The temples had raised pillars and were linked by stone walls, and each post contained a unique sculpture carved with images of the world ancient humans were living in. Such structures imply the coordinated activity of humans. It takes a lot of communication and teamwork to build something so significant. We always assumed little happened in the Paleolithic era, but perhaps there was more of a society than we thought. Maybe ancient humans in this time weren't moving about in small groups, never settling into tradition or community. Perhaps they had leaders and dynasties. The evidence is murky, but who's to say one way or the other? Theories about our ancient ancestors are constantly changing. For instance, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, people in Europe and North America thought that primitive humans weren't capable of full consciousness, like they were still savage in some way. Now, no scholar would claim that. Yet some experts still dismiss distant humans' imagination or skepticism of their world. Others have always taken seriously the idea that humans were our intellectual equals. Why wouldn't they have some sort of political system or burial ceremony? It's almost impossible to know, and the questions don't stop with our human history. What about the history of our planet? What came before us that was never recorded? Could there have been a civilization before humans created the one we live in today? To have civilization, you need a food surplus, which frees up most people to specialize in doing things other than producing food. You need farming, and you also need to require a specific minimum population density, or you wouldn't have enough individuals to run this theoretical civilization. Is there any way we can know if something like this existed? Fossils could easily miss an industrial civilization that lasted only 100,000 years, which, for the record, is 500 times longer than our current industrial civilization has been around. Since any ancient civilization would have needed energy and the capacity to exploit fossil fuels and other power sources as we do, scientists can theoretically look for worldwide effects that leave traces of this. Perhaps there would also be naturally occurring evidence like remnants of certain fossil fuels. There could also be non-natural evidence, like a product that compares to our plastic use. And you might think that we haven't found any signs of this, but you would be wrong in that. There's been the discovery of a thermal maximum event that occurred about 55.5 million years ago and lasted for about 100,000 years. We found chemical signals and traces of a warming that looks similar to the chemical signals and traces of our current world. It led to a global temperature rise of 9 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Could this be evidence of a pre-Ice Age industrial society? According to scientists who explored the issue, probably not. But it is important to ask because we'll never discover anything if we don't ask. What did ancient languages sound like as they rolled off people's tongues? What did they do when they encountered others who spoke differently than them? Were they afraid, or did they have a way to translate? What emotions did people have when someone died? Was it the same grief that we have experienced? What about relationships? Did mothers fight with their teenage daughters? Did people long for a sense of romantic love? There's only so much we can gather from skeletal remains and fossils. We'll never know what these societies were like because society is so much more than the remnants it leaves behind after it falls. And that's why an event like the burning of the Library of Alexandria is so poignant. It's a cautionary tale of the danger of the deprioritization of institutions that preserve and share knowledge. The term Alexandria has become shorthand for ignorance winning out. From the French Revolution to the late 20th century, Alexandria is a common term to describe the destruction of libraries and archives that are abandoned and forgotten. So yes, books were burned in Alexandria, but perhaps the actual crime was people not caring enough about their preservation in the first place. Attacks on knowledge can come from violence, like in the Holocaust or China's Cultural Revolution, but it can also come from the apathy towards institutions like we're witnessing today. In Iraq and Mali, Islamic extremists have targeted libraries. In the United Kingdom, more than 800 public libraries have closed over the past decade due to a lack of resources from the government. Now, tech companies are taking control of our archives as we move deeper into the digital era, but there's little regulation around what these powerful companies can do with our knowledge and history. In the end, it's going to be our experiences that tell the story of our world. Do we want to leave it in the hands of a few to decide what stories get kept and which get burned? I expand on this idea in this video. Big Tech is destroying ownership. Click on your screen to watch that next.
In 2013, Eric Loomis was pulled over by the police for driving a car that had been used in a shooting. A shooting, mind you, that he wasn't involved in at all. After getting arrested and taken to court, he pleaded guilty to attempting to flee an officer and no contest to operating a vehicle without the owner's permission. His crimes didn't mandate prison time, yet he was given an 11-year sentence, with 6 of those years to be served behind bars and the remaining 5 under extended supervision. Not because of the decision of a judge or jury of his peers, but because an algorithm said so. The judge in charge of Mr. Loomis's case determined that he had a high risk of recidivism through the use of the Correctional Officer Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions Risk Assessment Algorithm, or COMPAS. Without questioning the decision of the algorithm, Loomis was denied probation and incarcerated for a crime that usually wouldn't carry any time at all. What has society become if we can leave the fate of a person's life in the hands of an algorithm? When we take the recommendation of a machine as truth even when it seems so unreasonable and inhumane. Even more disturbing is the fact that the general public doesn't know how COMPAS works. The engineers behind it have refused to disclose how it makes recommendations and are not obliged to by any existing law. Yet we're all supposed to blindly trust and adhere to everything it says. Reading about this story, a few important questions come to mind. How much do algorithms control our lives, and ultimately, can we trust them? It's been roughly 10 years since Eric Loomis's sentencing, and algorithms now have a far greater penetration into our daily life. From the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, you're constantly interacting with tens, maybe even hundreds of algorithms. Let's say you wake up, tap open your screen and do a quick search for a place near you to eat breakfast. In this one act, you're triggering Google's complex algorithm that matches your keywords to websites and blog posts to show you answers that are most relevant to you. When you click on a website, an algorithm is used to serve you ads on the side of the page. Those ads might be products you've searched for before, stores near your location, or, eerily enough, something you've only spoken to someone about. You then try to message a friend to join you for your meal. When you open any social media app today, your feed no longer simply displays the most recent posts by people you follow. Instead, what you see can be best described by TikTok's For You page. Complex mathematical equations behind the scenes decide what posts are most relevant to you based on your view history on the platform. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and most notoriously TikTok all use these recommendation systems to get you to interact with the content that their machine thinks is right for you. And it's not just social media. Netflix emails you recommendations of movies to watch based on what you've already seen. Amazon suggests products based on what you've previously bought, and probably the most sinister of all, Tinder recommends you the person you're supposed to spend the rest of your life with. Or at least, that night. These might seem like trivial matters, but it's more than that. Algorithms are also used to determine who needs more healthcare, and when you have your day in court and a computer program decides whether you'd spend the next decade of your life behind bars for a crime that usually doesn't carry any time. One of the most dangerous things about algorithms is the data that is used to power them, because the more data you feed into an algorithm, the better its results. And where do companies get this data? It's from their users like you and me. Most of the time giving out this information is harmless, but a lot of times these companies sell your information to data brokers who then sell that data to other companies that want to sell you stuff. That's why you keep getting targeted ads from random companies you've never heard of before. And what's worse is that these data brokers are often targeted by nefarious actors who steal all the information they have in data breaches. I'm not saying that all algorithms are bad and we should get rid of them. An algorithm is probably the reason you're watching this video in the first place. I'm saying we as a society need to make some changes to the way we currently interact and use these systems. One of the scariest things about algorithms is that they're built and altered in a black box with little oversight. The engineers behind them determine what we see and don't see. They classify, sort, order, and rank, and we don't get to know how or why. Even the government doesn't get to know how and why, and if they did, would they understand it? The engineers themselves often don't know why an algorithm behaves the way it does. They use AI and machine learning, which can make the outcomes become hard to predict. They become a mystery to makers as well. When companies like Google or Facebook are challenged about their platforms after something terrible happens, they hide behind the mythos of the algorithm. They're cold, unbiased systems, they suggest. They're rational. To err is human, not machine, they claim. This is the notion of algorithms that is potentially dangerous. We think of them as pillars of objectivity, incapable of the kind of biases that corrupt human society. But are they genuinely unbiased? Are they pure instruments of rationality? As much as big tech companies would like you to believe they are, the sad truth is they are not. When the engineers choose to classify and sort, they're using pre-existing classifications which are filled with bias already, and their methods of sorting enforce biases that can have real negative consequences. In 2019, an algorithm was used on more than 200 million patients in US hospitals to determine who would need more care. Although race wasn't included in the criteria, Black patients were discriminated against by the machine anyway. They were determined to require less care than white patients. How did this happen if race wasn't even an input, you might ask? Well, while race directly wasn't in the equation, previous healthcare expenses were a determining factor in deciding whether someone would need more care. And because Black patients have historically spent less on healthcare, the results were that they required less care, an incorrect blanket conclusion for situations that should be case-by-case evaluations. Although the racial bias was unintended, it still occurred as a result of the engineers' designs. It's because of issues like these that we can't hide behind the myth of the infallible machine. Biases like these will exist in machines as long as humans are the ones building them, and there is one bias that exists in almost every algorithm we use today, with far more reaching consequences. Meta, Twitter, Google, Amazon, Netflix, Tinder. Most tech companies and the platforms they offer you and me as services design their algorithms to maximize one thing and one thing alone: profit. These platforms generate revenue by primarily selling ads, and to generate more ad revenue, they try to keep you on their platforms longer because the longer you're there, the more ads you'll see and the more money they make. Take YouTube, for example. There's 3 main things that make any video successful on the platform: click-through rate, watch time, and session time. So all YouTube cares about is, can you get people to start watching your video, and can you keep them watching for as long as possible, so we can serve them more ads. For the most part, this works as it's supposed to, and people get served content they enjoy, but would have never found on their own. As with everything in life though, there are downsides. People have learned to game the system by using clickbait to lure viewers in, and then to push conspiracy theories that keep people glued to their screens whether the information is factual or not. YouTube's algorithm has also been accused of having a radicalizing effect on its viewers. Moderate content always leads to recommendations of more extreme content, which leads people down the notorious rabbit hole. You can start by watching videos about jogging, and YouTube would continue to recommend you videos that push you further slightly until one day you wake up and you're watching videos about running an ultramarathon. Facebook's algorithm shows you more content from friends whose posts you've liked or read in the past. This process slowly funnels you into a bubble where you're mostly reading the same opinions you already have, reinforcing them in your mind. The goal of this approach is, of course, to keep you on the platform longer with views you agree with. The consequence, though, is that many harmful beliefs are cemented into the heads of users on the platform instead of being challenged. The more you think about the algorithms of social media, the more they start to seem like programs for creating social problems for the sake of profit. So if that's the case, are all algorithms just evil piles of code that are determined to doom us all? Maybe, but maybe not. They do have extraordinary benefits to offer when used correctly. A dataset of 678 nuns from the Nun Study, a research project started in 1986 on the development of dementia and Alzheimer's, showed something very peculiar. Researchers tried to find if they could spot any patterns in the data to suggest a relationship between something in a person's early life and the onset of these diseases later in life, but to no avail. The team also had success to the letters that the nuns wrote decades prior, when they were entering into the sisterhood, around ages 19 and 20. An algorithm was able to detect in incredible accuracy through these letters which nuns would go on to have dementia in their elderly years. This is what algorithms are great at, comparing datasets and figuring out tiny patterns that humans are more likely to miss. They're sensitive to variations in data and finding patterns that lead to reliable predictions of possible outcomes. Today, algorithms are used in detecting the likelihood of getting breast cancer and presenting better models for tackling climate change. Except the machine isn't great on its own. Every potential positive here only works with a human behind it. Algorithms can act as the first layer for screening breast cancers, but a human has to act as that necessary second layer to verify the results. Using an algorithm for determining an appropriate jail sentence might one day make sense, only if there's a human deciding whether or not the generated output is sensible or not. One of the main problems with Eric Loomis's case is that the judge didn't question the algorithm's recommendation. He simply accepted the supposed objectivity of the machine and sent a man to prison for a crime that didn't warrant it. As it stands now, we just seem to be part of this enormous social experiment being run by tech gurus. And every year or so, another social experiment is added to the mix with its own unique set of social consequences. More recently, we're discovering what a rapid stream of bite-sized videos does to teenagers, or what a completely user-generated game does to tweens. So far, this video has been pretty hard on the big tech companies, but I think it's also really important to acknowledge that they are trying to address some of these issues with algorithms. YouTube, for example, has changed its algorithm to include quality and authority as measures of determining whether a video is recommended or not. Facebook has limited its targeting options to try and avoid another Cambridge Analytica scandal where user data was distributed without consent for political purposes. Are these adjustments to the algorithm helping? Yes, but not as much as necessary. Even more is the fact that these efforts point to two things. One is that human intervention in algorithms is not only necessary, but needs a much stronger presence. Two is that tinkering with the algorithm is probably not going to resolve the consequences of their most significant bias, profit-seeking. Keeping people on a platform is always going to be easier with content that sparks the most outrage. That's not always the case, of course. There is great content on YouTube and earnest viewers, like you watching this video right now. But for every creator seeking to share legitimate information, there seems to be several others blatantly exploiting the algorithm for a quick buck. How can we take these platforms back from them? The sad truth is, we can't. The algorithms need to change. They need to put human welfare above profits. We need to stop designing machines that take advantage of our psychological weaknesses. To make that world possible, we need to be more critical of the algorithm. We need to dismantle the notion that the algorithm is all-knowing, objective, and rational. The black boxes need to open up, and our blind trust in these systems needs to be challenged at every turn. To paraphrase the co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, Tristan Harris, we're all looking out for the moment when technology would overpower human strength and intelligence. But there's a much earlier moment when technology overwhelms human weaknesses. That point is being crossed right now, and it's reducing our attention spans, ruining our relationships, destroying our communities. It's downgrading humans. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Have you ever met someone who calls himself a nihilist? Maybe you have a friend from college or a family member who says they're a disciple of Nietzsche. At every opportunity, they love to wax poetic about the meaninglessness of life. Briefly indulging them in their philosophical ideas can expand your mind and help you to see things you never would have. But the truth is, outside of philosophical discussion, leading a nihilistic life is bleak. Think about it, if nothing matters and we're all just specks of dust floating through space and time, what's the point in trying at all? Building healthy relationships with friends and family doesn't seem worth it because in the end, everyone you know will die anyway. All attempts at self-improvement are futile because in the universe's grand plan, none of it matters. Even if you're not all doom and gloom, there will be days when getting out of bed will seem pointless, where life itself will seem kinda pointless, and the current state of the world, with issues like the climate crisis, the rise in extreme politics, and economic instability, doesn't help with our psychological state. This glimpse into the void might dissuade you from wanting to do anything with your life. You're staring down nihilism, the belief in nothing. And framed like this, it makes life sound pretty awful. But there's another way to look at nihilism, one that teaches you not to see the glass as half full or half empty, but instead to throw the glass away and drink straight from the faucet until you're satisfied. This is optimistic nihilism, the realization that the universe's meaninglessness is the most liberating thing in the world. It's the type of nihilism you get when standing on the precipice of a huge mountain or watching a mother bird feed her young. It's the profound smack of insignificance you feel when faced with the miracle of your existence. The amount of luck and chance that it took for you to get here in the first place. Optimistic nihilism doesn't mean we're doomed to live in a meaningless universe. Instead, it allows us to experience the universe in our own unique ways. According to the nihilist, you and I don't matter. Nothing does. Religious morality or societal norms don't restrict your existence. You are entirely free and in control of making your life mean something. Once you accept the meaninglessness of your life as a gift rather than a burden, you find peace with the life you have. Because life is brief and fleeting, it's precious. Writing in the late 19th century, German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was worried about modernity. He was very critical of the traditional European morality and the religion of his time, which placed Christian beliefs at the center of social and political life. In his 1882 book, The Gay Science, he proclaimed the infamous line, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him." Here Nietzsche didn't make an argument for atheism. Instead, he observed that believing in one true Christian God was no longer central to European society. People's lives no longer revolved around the church's calendar or teachings. Industrial means production gripped Europe, flooding the pockets of factory owners and enforcing a standardized workday on everyone else. With that, personal freedom and agency became core values in society. People no longer yearned for a higher power to guide them through life, explain what comes after death, or show them right from wrong. Increasingly, people took these matters into their own hands. While Nietzsche was critical of religion, he was equally skeptical of what society could become without it. He understood that without Christianity as a guiding principle, people might move through life confused and disorientated. A world without God creates a void of understanding in our lives, and humans aren't psychologically capable of a pure belief in nothing. We're always searching for purpose in anything, even when we're not aware of it. Think about how you start your day. Imagine you wake up and look out your window to see a beautiful owl perched on your balcony railing. You might associate that with having a good or bad day depending on the culture you were raised in. We're constantly making connections and associations like this in our lives down to the most mundane things. People aren't built to remain in a constant nihilistic state. It's only a phase that allows us to gain perspective on the structures that govern our everyday life. According to Nietzsche, we fill the void where God once was with ourselves. We become our own tiny gods, so to speak. We give ourselves the authority to distinguish right from wrong and determine our individual meanings in life. If nihilism from a Nietzschean point of view interests you, we made an entire video on nihilism, so you can check that out by clicking on the link in the description. The existentialists who came after Nietzsche, like French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, expanded on this idea. To Sartre, we have complete freedom over our lives in a world without God or objective meaning, but with great power comes great responsibility. You have the power to shape the life you want to live. Let that sink in for a moment. Yes, you can make good choices for yourself, but how are you supposed to know which choices are good, and how often do you do things that are against your own self-interest? In good moments when things are going well for you, you might feel empowered and in control. You may get the promotion you deserve or marry the person you love. You might move to a new city and establish a community of friends that you couldn't imagine life without. You've invested time, energy, and love into making a meaningful life for yourself without following arbitrary rules or some intangible plan ordained from above. All the good things in your life have come from you. Yet, in the trenches of the everyday, life can seem overwhelming, especially when you're in charge of making sure you have a good one. To give our lives meaning, we create internal narratives about ourselves, and this is where we start to run into issues. We tell ourselves we're hard workers, and consequently the importance of our jobs and the identity they provide us with start to weigh us down. It's the same at school. Students get sick with anxiety about test scores and grades as if getting into the perfect college will finally confirm their life's worth. Similarly, you inject meaning into your love and family life. You strive to be the perfect parent, child, or partner because of your belief that these relationships will make your life meaningful. This is what keeps people in unhealthy or toxic relationships. They've attached this idea of meaning or worth to something that's ultimately meaningless. Having to constantly reaffirm who you are because there's no higher power to do that work for you can be exhausting. While we have the freedom of total control, it also bogs us down. What happens when you're busy shaping the life you think you want, yet you're still unhappy? All this meaning making, trying to make sense of your life, contributes to a plague of depression and anxiety, especially among millennials and Gen Z. People are burned out, stressed out, and exhausted. So why do we chase meaning? Even with this feeling in the back of our minds that none of it matters, there's a contradiction between our pursuit of meaning and the reality of a meaningless universe. It's devastating to confront the idea that all the hard work we put into making our lives mean something is for nothing. Optimistic nihilism is the solution to this anxiety that we inherit when we're forced into the position of making meaning out of our lives. Yes, nothing matters, but isn't that a relief? You can find yourself responding to the seemingly urgent work emails at 3 a.m. or over-obsessing over your Instagram caption, but in the moment, it feels like the weight of the world rests on these things. You spend late nights tossing and turning, all of your mistakes and wrongdoings spinning, until you've convinced yourself that you're the worst person on the planet. But embracing that none of these things ultimately matter is freeing. Forgive yourself for your past mistakes and look forward, excited to experience the future. When we're the center of our own structures of meaning, every choice we make, good or bad, becomes weighted with significance. When you find yourself in one of these mindsets where your life feels too big to handle, remind yourself that you're small and insignificant. The universe is indifferent to your worries, struggles, and mistakes, and in the end, none of it matters. You'll die one day, and in the future, no one will remember your brief flight on this planet. There's no use fretting about trying to create the perfect life, because the energy spent making your life mean something is worthless. When it's all said and done, you're dust. It's completely normal to allow the squirming sensation of your insignificance to wash over you for a moment, but staring nihilism in the face is only uncomfortable if you let it be. If you call yourself an optimistic nihilist, it's probably good practice to confront all the different emotions your meaninglessness makes you feel. Otherwise, you won't reap the actual benefits of optimistic nihilism. Instead, it'll be a bandage to your problems, something you just tell yourself to believe in order to get through the day instead of a true guiding principle. You need to sit with your nothingness and accept it for what it is. Then use the objective meaninglessness of life to relieve yourself from the pressure that meaning-making entails. Take a look at your life and all it means to you, your relationships, the values you hold close, the things that get you out of bed in the morning. You have to be willing to part with all of them and embrace the void that they leave behind. Suddenly, the choices you make are the problems you face every day. Things that take up so much of your mental capacity don't seem so overbearing. Optimistic nihilism frees you from the crushing burden of meaning-making. Of course, it doesn't absolve you of wrongdoing. Your actions still have consequences, and you shouldn't give in to all your impulses for the sake of it. Continue creating a life that you love, one that you're excited to live, whatever that means. But just know that in the end, everything you've made will dissolve into the ether and you'll leave nothing behind. In the face of this reality, take advantage of all the sweetness life offers.
the good things in your life are made all the more beautiful because of their fleeting insignificance. Sharing a meal with those you love, the smell of blooming lilacs in spring, and even petting your cat. It's such a miracle that you're here, able to experience anything. So shouldn't you spend your life enjoying yourself instead of worrying so much about making your life mean something? Life is precious, beautiful, and awe-inspiring, despite its chaos and disorder. It's a wonder that you can find goodness amid a void of meaning. You need to end the hopeless search of meaning-making and dive headfirst into the void. And when you emerge on the other side, you'll find nothing. But that nothing will be clear and bright, a guiding light into a better, yet fleeting life. Tim Cook of Apple, Sundar Pichai of Google, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, the President of the United States. When you think of the people controlling the world, these names come to mind. But the truth is, while these people have a significant influence over our lives, 4 companies secretly control the world, and only a handful of people hold significant power in those companies. These are the people who have the potential to change your life for better or worse, without you ever realizing what's happening. I made a video talking about how BlackRock controls the world, and unsurprisingly, they are one of the 4 companies we'll discuss today. Altogether, these 4 companies manage almost $24 trillion worth of assets. They have the most influence over the United States' monetary policy and operate with very little oversight, which means they're free to do almost anything they want. And their power doesn't end in the United States. These companies also own a significant stake in the vast majority of European companies that are listed on the US stock exchange. Now, you might think this is an exaggeration. How can 4 companies control so much wealth? But it is true, and the information is available once you just look for it. From the largest retail stores like Walmart and Home Depot to transportation companies like GMC and Boeing, pharmaceutical companies like Merck, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and media companies like Disney, Viacom, News Corp, NBC, CBS, Time Warner, and AT&T. They influence the banking system as they're involved in every decision made at the largest financial institutions like Bank of America, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Citigroup. In the United States, the US Federal Reserve, the country's central banking institution, has board members who represent these 4 investment firms. Global financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are influenced heavily by these companies. So, who exactly are these 4 companies? The largest of the 4 companies, BlackRock, was founded in 1988 by Larry Fink. Like the other 3 firms, BlackRock is a fiduciary, which means that a person has placed trust in them to act in their best financial interest. BlackRock does this primarily through mutual funds, a collection of assets that invest in stocks, bonds, and other securities like real estate. BlackRock currently has 70 offices in 30 countries around the globe and holds $10 trillion in assets. The company is currently worth $20 trillion, which is half of the US's yearly gross domestic product, or GDP. This is the measure of value created by a country by producing goods and services. The other 3 companies are Vanguard, State Street, and Fidelity Investments. Vanguard manages $7.6 trillion in assets and is the world's largest issuer of mutual funds. At the end of 2022, it had 203 US funds and 227 international funds, which served its 50 million investors. Vanguard's founder, John Bogle, created the Indexed Investment Fund in 1976, now known as the Vanguard 500 Index Fund. You might be wondering the difference between an index and a mutual fund. An index fund is a type of mutual fund that is passively managed as opposed to other mutual funds, which are actively managed. So when Bogle invented this index fund, he created a formula to track returns on the market and invest accordingly. State Street is owned by Vanguard now, but is the second oldest continually operating US bank. Its predecessor, Union Bank, was founded in 1792. State Street manages $3.9 trillion in investment assets. Along with Vanguard and BlackRock, it is one of the prominent 3 index fund managers that dominate corporate America. Fidelity Investments manages $4.3 trillion in assets. It was founded by Edward Johnson II in 1946 and has remained a family-owned and operated business ever since. Fidelity was the first major American finance firm to market mutual funds to everyone via mail and door-to-door sales. Before they opened their doors, the mere idea of investing had been reserved for wealthy individuals. Hearing that alone, you might be wondering what exactly is wrong with these companies. They all sound like industry pioneers who have done incredible to stay in business for so long. And while that is entirely right, it's only half the story. To figure out the other half, let's start with what these companies tell us they do. Each of these firms helps everyday people invest their money, and whether you're a multimillionaire or an hourly worker looking to create a small investment fund for your family, they've helped democratize investing. And often, investing with them can seem like a good idea, especially lately, because in today's world, we're not just worried about making money, we're concerned about making money and helping move society forward. That's where ESG investing comes in. ESG, which stands for Environmental Social Governance, is a type of investing that considers social and environmental factors. So basically, what is the company you're investing in doing about environmental issues like climate change? All four of these firms advertise their commitment to ESG. As you would expect, some people have mocked these firms' stance on ESG, calling it woke investing. In response, companies like BlackRock have responded by saying it's not woke, it's capitalism. The way they see it, climate change poses a risk, so investing in companies that further the effects of climate change is also a risk. On the flip side, investing in companies trying to mitigate that risk is good business. To give them all the credit, they've put their money where their mouths are. In 2021, Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street successfully shook up the board of ExxonMobil by installing new members who promised to take on climate change. And BlackRock let the state of West Virginia, a huge coal producer, pull out of the investment firm due to their pledge to invest in net zero companies. But when you peel back the curtain, it's not as wholesome as these firms would like to make it sound, especially when it comes to ESG investing. Every single one of these companies is about as hypocritical as they get. Vanguard specifically praises its own ESG investing, while also owning $86 billion in coal companies, making it the world's largest investor in the industry. BlackRock is the top investor in fossil fuels and deforestation, war profiteering, and doing business with human rights violators. Look no further than BlackRock's deal with the Chinese government. The firm became the first company to have access to China's vast mutual fund market, followed by Fidelity. This left many skeptics wondering, what did they promise President Xi Jinping? With this deal, these two companies will be pouring more and more money into the Chinese companies, which are primarily controlled by the Chinese government, a growing adversary of Western democracies. Even more controversial are the firm's investments in Russia. All of these companies had assets invested in Russian companies, and once the war broke out in Ukraine, they all responded, at least publicly, by freezing those investments or pulling out of them altogether. Whether or not those assets will stay out of Russia long-term is questionable. Regardless, years and years of investments from these four companies undoubtedly helped fund Putin's invasion of Ukraine. No matter how you slice it, these companies are riddled with conflicts of interest. In Ukraine, BlackRock is one of the leaders trying to advise the country on rebuilding once the conflict is resolved. This might seem benevolent, but not all that glitters is gold. In reality, BlackRock is simply capitalizing on a war that their funds helped finance so they can make more money closer to home than the others. The Johnson family, which founded and runs Fidelity, also runs a venture capital arm that competes with Fidelity's investments, which means the family benefits, while Fidelity investors get a crappy deal. For example, from 2011 to 2012, F Prime Capital, the family's venture capital arm, invested $11 million in Ultragenyx Pharmaceutical Incorporated before it went public. This investment prevented Fidelity's mutual funds from making the same play because, if it did, it would have violated US securities laws, so the family-owned fund got the better stock value while the public funds, which invested in the company at a higher rate, kind of got screwed. Essentially, these companies, which have immense power and control in our world, tell us a manicured PR statement about what they're doing, but in reality the story is much more complicated and problematic. None of their success would have been possible without the various proprietary technologies they developed to help their investing strategies. The prime example is BlackRock's Aladdin technology, which began the trend of using technology to minimize the risk of investing. It manages $20 trillion in assets and predicts the outcome of every single investment while getting information and personal data on everyone who knowingly or unknowingly gave BlackRock their money. This technology and others like it are perfect for investors. They've helped to lower the cost of managing the investment while improving returns. This type of technology is what makes companies like BlackRock and others grow. It gives them an edge. It allows them to apply their investing strategy company-wide. It'll enable investors to diversify their portfolios more effectively. Technologies like this democratize investing, allowing anyone of any level of wealth to benefit from a sound investment strategy. This is why over 80% of all assets invested over the last decade have gone to these four companies, but at what cost? And if these companies continue to revolutionize, advance their technologies, and control more and more investor assets, then what? We're at risk of ownership concentration if BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity, and State Street continue increasing their influence over the biggest companies across every industry. competition's just gonna decrease. They'll be competing with themselves, which isn't competing at all. This leads to less consumer choice and higher prices, and we can see this already happening in the airline industry. Over the last 14 years, airfares have increased by as much as 7% because there's less pressure to compete. BlackRock and Vanguard are among the 5 largest shareholders of the biggest 3 operators. But this isn't just about the companies, it's about the people who run and own them. The people who make the decisions, pull the levers, and hold so much power you can't imagine. Starting with Larry Fink, the founder, chairman, and CEO of BlackRock. He started out at a New York-based investment bank where he rose to manage the firm's bond department. Unfortunately, his career there ended when he lost his department $100 million after an incorrect prediction about interest rates. This led him to focus his next venture on investing in risk management, and BlackRock was born. He founded the firm in 1988 and grew it from $5 million to $8 billion in just 5 years. Abigail Johnson, CEO of Fidelity Investments, didn't grow the company she leads from the ground up. She's the granddaughter of Fidelity's founder, Edward Johnson II. She started as an analyst and portfolio manager at the company before being promoted to the president of Fidelity's asset management division. In this position in the early 2000s, like an episode of Succession, Johnson unsuccessfully attempted to remove her father as CEO over disagreements about how to lead the company. It wouldn't take too long for her time to come though, as in 2014 she was named CEO. State Street CEO Ronald O'Hanley has ties to Fidelity, having previously served as the president of asset management and corporate services there before entering his current role. The world of finance is a lot smaller than you think. And Vanguard, uniquely, is owned by its clients, or instead by the funds they invest in. Its president and CEO Mortimer J. Buckley started his career as an assistant to the company's founder John Bogle. Bogle, the guy who essentially invented the index fund, may not like the direction his business is going in. He's warned of ownership concentration, saying that too much money is in too few hands. Undoubtedly, asset management has made Mr. Bogle a very wealthy man, but perhaps he sees beyond that. Maybe he understands the power he and others like him have over every industry they invest in, and every investor who entrusts them. He may be issuing a warning to us all, but it's not one we're likely able to do anything about. Because these 4 companies are just too influential. A global financial system meant to empower individual investors has empowered a select few instead. So while we get distracted by celebrities' faces on the front of magazines or flashing by in our social media posts, these company leaders are behind the scenes, pulling the levers and secretly deciding the financial future of our world, whether we like it or not. The worst of them all is BlackRock. Watch this video next to understand why.
TikTok is far more dangerous than we thought. In the past 2 years, at least 15 kids, aged 12 or younger, across the globe from Milwaukee to Sicily, have painfully passed on after attempting what seemed to them like a harmless challenge they found on the world's most popular app, TikTok. The Blackout Challenge encourages users to record holding their breath until they passed out, and viewers could, essentially, watch as they regained consciousness. Despite the fact that this is obviously dangerous for anyone on the planet, in the hands of children, the trend had far more devastating consequences. The NyQuil Challenge, Penny Challenge, the Milk Crate Challenge. Time after time, we've seen TikTok spring up one dangerous viral trend after another, all of which puts users, especially younger users, in potential serious danger. In a previous Aperture episode, we looked at the mental health effects of TikTok, but it seems as though the self-inflicted risks directly linked to the app are more far-reaching and have greater consequences than we could have ever imagined. From health and safety to privacy and security, given the long list of problems that TikTok seems to pose to the general public, what do we do? What can we do? Can we fix TikTok, or should we just ban the app entirely? Before we answer that question, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor for today's video, Masterworks. One of the dangers of excessive TikTok usage is that it could potentially leave us with less time as a society for more important things like art. TikTok right now is worth an estimate of $50 billion, which might sound like a lot, but it's nothing compared to the $1.7 trillion asset class that is art. If you open TikTok, you'll find its genius upon first glance. An endless stream of content from strangers all across the globe curated specifically for you by one of the most refined algorithms humanity has ever created. You get a rush of dopamine from watching dogs do dances to amateur chefs making elaborate meals. Before we look at just how dangerous TikTok has become, I think it's important for me to mention that it's definitely not all bad. TikTok's rise to the top was greatly accelerated during the pandemic. Everyone was forced to stay indoors without physical access to their friends, family, or community. To help us find a way to connect, young people flock to TikTok, doing silly dances and challenges to cure their boredom and help them feel part of a community again. They found solace in an app, from doctors explaining COVID symptoms people were experiencing to a random comment saving people from potentially life-threatening conditions. Whether you got bullied at school or you were living in an unhappy home, you could log onto the app and see other people in the same exact situation as you, offering help, support, and a sense of belonging. Sadly, the reality, as with most things, is that there's far more than meets the eye. Just spend a few minutes on the app and instantly you can see just how difficult, almost impossible it is to leave. Today's people spend more time there than they do on any other social media platform, with a global average of 96 minutes per day. And for some, the number is far greater than that. This, for anyone, is just way too much time on just one app, but it's even worse when you realize that around half of TikTok's users are young people, many of whom are below the age of 13. Creators and users who try to destigmatize mental health on the app see the benefits of more people learning and talking about these issues. Isn't that only the case, though, if users are getting the right information? One of the greatest problems on TikTok is that just about anyone can buy a scrub on Amazon and claim to be a doctor, spreading misinformation with ease. There's no formal fact-checking, so often we might just hear what we want to hear. If we have a symptom we're worried about, these videos could have the WebMD effect of making us think we're dying when we're really just having mild allergies. When you think about it like that, you realize that the videos pushed to us by TikTok can actually worsen what we're feeling. If we're anxious about a relationship or a meeting at work and we're continually getting shown videos of other anxious people, is that going to help us feel better or make us spiral? All of these issues are without mentioning the things that plague every social media app, like cyberbullying, social exclusion, or the temptation to compare ourselves to others. We get addicted to scrolling and posting and scrolling and posting and scrolling until we're convinced that we're just not as good as everyone else. The scariest thing about it is that no one is immune to the grasp of the algorithm, not even those who should be better informed. One doctor, Brian Boxer-Wackler, grew an impressive TikTok following by offering medical advice and reaching to other health-related videos. Knowing his audience, he became fluent in Gen Z slang to be more relatable, despite being middle-aged. He became so obsessed with growing his following that his family had to stage an intervention to help him curb his addiction and approach his channel as a healthy distraction rather than an obsession.
It was unbelievable when you wake up and you see your video got hundreds of thousands or millions of views. It's just this rush. Those are real effects. I mean, those are the same effects that people get with drugs.
In late 2022, he released a book detailing his experiences with social media addiction. Creators have to produce new videos all the time to maintain view counts. The pressure and the burnout that comes with it is real no matter what your age, education level, or IQ score. In that sense, TikTok is a great democratizer of our time, but with debilitating side effects. Seeing all the dangers of TikTok, the big question remains, is this fixable? Is there a way to combat all those dopamine hits we feel every time we open the app? The problem is that the app wants us to be addicted. That's how it keeps users, increases downloads, and stays relevant. We can put restrictions on our screen time or make our phones require breaks from the app as much as we want, but if the app doesn't change, chances are that we won't either. And for most people, that's okay. They might obsess over the latest TikTok dance or unfairly compare themselves to a beauty influencer, but they'll be fine. Their life won't be dramatically altered. But for kids, the potential damage is much higher. TikTok took down 41 million underage accounts in the first half of 2022 alone, but that's a fool's errand. Those users can just sign up again with a different account. TikTok's army of 40,000 global moderators review potentially harmful videos, but it's an impossible task to catch everything. Over 1 billion videos are viewed on the app every single day. That means each mod will have to review 25,000 videos, and let's say the videos average out to around a minute each. That's still 416 hours of content to watch in 24 hours. It's literally impossible. So how do we protect kids? There's no effective way to block underage users from social media platforms because it's impossible to verify their age. But what if it wasn't? In 2021, TikTok met with providers of facial age estimation software, which can distinguish between a child and a teen and can work without directly identifying an individual or storing any data. This could be a game changer for an app that's trying to be safer for children, but unfortunately, child safety isn't the only scandal swirling around TikTok. Facial recognition technology on an app that's been accused of spying on its users and sharing data with the government wouldn't be a great look. We can't really talk about TikTok in today's world without talking about privacy.
Most of us know and ignorantly accept that our data is being stored, seen, and used in some way when we surf the internet. It's the classic accept all cookies option without thinking. But it's TikTok and its parent company ByteDance taking it to a new level. An internal investigation found that a group of ByteDance employees was found to be surveilling several US journalists who covered the app in an attempt to track potential anonymous sources. In 2020, a security update on the iPhone caught TikTok tracking the keystrokes of Apple users while on the app. But here's the thing, ByteDance isn't the first company to be accused of this. Uber and Facebook have been known to track the location of journalists who report on their apps, just like TikTok employees were found to be doing. And in more than 124,000 documents leaked to the press in 2022, spanning 2014 to 2017, Uber was shown to be doing everything it could to bypass regulations across the globe. Meta, Twitter, Google, and even Apple all collect and use our personal data in some way. So what's the big issue with ByteDance? Geopolitics. ByteDance is a Chinese company. TikTok says that it doesn't share user data with the Chinese government, but politicians, journalists, and other critics are quick to call a bluff. China already has a practice of stealing massive quantities of data about Americans and other governments, but do TikTok and its billions of user profiles offer a more direct line? If the security concerns turn out to be true, we might see widespread fraud, hacking, or influence operations launched through the platform. As a result, United States lawmakers have issued warnings about the app and enacted executive orders to address the potential security risks it poses. Calls from inside the US Congress have, in a feat of modern-day politics, brought Republicans and Democrats together against a common enemy. Closed-doors talk between TikTok executives and the Committee on Foreign Investment in the US have been going on for years. There's a security contact in negotiations with the Treasury Department on how TikTok will handle Americans' user data. All of this in an effort to fix things, to curb the threat, to limit our exposure as users. But will it work? Many think that contracts, talks, and hearings won't get the job done, that fixing just isn't an option. The calls to ban TikTok in the United States and many other countries grow by the day. The US military banned the app in 2019. Now, TikTok is off limits on all government devices, and there's a bill sitting in Congress to prohibit it completely. Take a second to think what that would look like. The most popular app in the world unavailable in the United States. Would there be revolts, cheers, confusion, a restructuring of society as we know it? To understand what life post-TikTok could be like, look no further than China's neighbor, India. The East Asian country banned TikTok in 2020 after a geopolitical dispute with China. Of course there are consequences. People employed by TikTok in India lost their jobs. Influencers who had massed followings on the app lost their income. But it wasn't all bad in India. In fact, it was surprisingly good for many of its citizens. Replacement apps developed in India are hoping to fill the hole that TikTok's departure created, with the hopes of focusing on the needs of its users rather than doing whatever it takes to fulfill business objectives. If India does this well, will other countries follow suit? For now, we can't really say for sure. As for US national security, there's no smoking gun, no evidence of an urgent threat. This begs the question, is all the discussion by politicians and regulators really about a unique national security issue, or is it a way for them to talk about larger issues like privacy, disinformation, and content moderation that help bolster their own personal gains platforms? Despite any ulterior motives, the potential for danger seems to be enough to at least keep conversations about partial or full bans of the app going. And you don't even need to look through a globalized lens to understand that there's harmful aspects to TikTok. Remember the kids who suffered a terrible fate attempting the blackout challenge they were never supposed to see in the first place? The reality is that technology is always one step ahead of us, our governments, and our ability to maintain our mental health. And as long as there's money to be made, it won't slow down. Because users aren't customers, we're the product, something to be sold and analyzed in the name of financial gain. If measures like enforcing age restrictions to make an app safer aren't in the interest of a company's bottom line, why would they ever enact them? So can we fix TikTok, or should we just get rid of it? The app is making small efforts to fix itself, adding new features like one that tells users why the algorithm recommends certain videos, but the algorithm is designed to keep people watching for as long as possible, so it promotes the most extreme, the most controversial, the most eye-catching videos, and even if you know why you're watching a video, will it really change the way the video makes you feel or act? TikTok could try a route such as YouTube took with YouTube Kids to protect its youngest users. It's a version of the platform designed for children 12 and under that hosts age-appropriate videos and screen time limits. As for our privacy and security, perhaps it's up to the government of the world to place restrictions on what information about its citizens a foreign body has access to.
or if a full ban of the world's most popular app is in our future to protect us, our mental health, and the safety of our homes, those 96 minutes on average that we spend every day on TikTok would have to go towards something else. I would encourage us all to focus that time on something more productive, because the reality is a world without TikTok will still have other platforms that embrace the blistering pace and addictive nature of short-form content. Things being lit on fire, flash mobs performing goofy choreographed dances, and people eating too much pizza on camera. In fact, right now, there's already YouTube Shorts, Instagram, and Facebook Reels, so we better watch out.
You wake up to the sound of the alarm on your iPhone, and annoyed that you couldn't get more sleep, you grudgingly unlock your phone to see what's going on in the world, and there's an email from Amazon telling you that your package has been delivered. So you force yourself out of bed to get the package, and it's some Johnson & Johnson medicine you ordered the night before. The wonders of overnight shipping, you think to yourself. You glance across the room to see the clock. It's 8 a.m. and you have to be at work by 9. Flustered, you open your Microsoft computer to answer some work emails before getting dressed. There's no time to cook breakfast, so you'll just grab something at McDonald's on your way to work. What if I told you that every single company you just interacted with, within the first hour of your day,